Hello guys, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was the most neglected child in Konoha, but also the only one capable of ending the cycle of hatred? If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation.
3-year-old Naruto Uzumaki was having a rather bad day. It had started nice enough. Three of the ladies working at the orphanage had taken them into one of the public parks to play. None of the other children had wanted to play with him. They never did. Unfortunately, that didn't stop them from bullying him. He had been sitting peacefully in the grass some distance away from the others while playing with random stuff like sticks and pine cones. They never let him play with real toys. Occasionally he had glanced wistfully at the other children scattered in groups throughout the park. One moment he had been engrossed in his game, the next one of the older boys had trampled everything. Naturally Naruto had been pissed. The situation degraded from shouting to shoving to scuffling in merely a minute. Finally one of the caretakers had bothered to investigate. The bully had tearfully proclaimed his innocence and named Naruto as the instigator. As always, the caretaker believed the worst of Naruto and had been berating him for his aggressive behavior, promising punishment for later. Seeing the now smirking bully behind the irate caretaker, Naruto simply couldn't take it anymore. He had needed to get away from everyone. The other children either wanted nothing to do with him or were actively bullying him. The caretakers in general let it happen and ignored him, only interfering if the fights threatened to cause serious injury to him. They did nothing against the countless scrapes and bruises he sustained almost daily. If they were looking at him at all, they glared at him coldly, although they did pay him more than his fair share of attention concerning punishments. He was always punished for whatever disturbance he was involved in regardless of his guilt, and occasionally even without any reason he could discern with his childish but developing mind. Naruto didn't understand why they did it. He tried to be friendly and good, he really tried. But nothing what he did seemed to make a difference, and now it had become too much. He had needed some time alone. With eyes burning with unshed tears, he had turned around and had run away as fast as his short legs could carry him. After he was out of view, he had taken a sharp turn and entered a small obscured path between two bushes. It led to an old gnarled oak with a large hollow he had discovered on a previous visit to the park. He had crawled into the hollow and curled up, now letting his tears fall freely. After a short while he had fallen asleep. If he had looked back he would have seen the caretaker's angry expression morph into one of satisfaction. She patted the bully on his head and even gave him a piece of candy for a job well done. Her plan to get the demon boy away from the other children had worked better than anticipated. After all, she could assign additional punishment for the boys running away. With a little more luck they would even have to search for him by the time they had to return to the orphanage, warranting even more punishment. How they could let one like him stay around other children she would never understand. Humming a merry tune, she returned her attention to the bulk of the children in her care, putting Naruto completely out of her mind. Said boy had woken much later. Upon leaving his hiding place he had found the park abandoned. Now he tried to make his way back to the orphanage. It was somewhat difficult as he didn't know the precise route. He was pretty sure he was walking in the right general direction, but it would have been better if he could ask one of the adults. The only problem was that almost no one was in sight. The streets were almost completely deserted and all of the shops closed. Most buildings had boards nailed over the windows. The few people visible seemed all in a terrible hurry. The wind was steadily gaining speed and the temperature dropping. The formerly blue sky was heavily overcast and growing darker by the minute. Naruto felt a shiver course through his body. He was only wearing a thin short-sleeved shirt and short trousers. He tried to approach one middle-aged man who was straining to pull a handcart laden with various items with two girls not much older than Naruto sitting on top. "Hello, I'm lost. Please could you help me find the orphanage?" Quote. The man turned towards him and was about to answer when he noticed the whisker marks on the face of the young boy. His kindly expression vanished instantly and was replaced with one of anger and disgust. "You, get away from me and my family or I'll tan your hide," the man spat. Naruto didn't know what was happening. Why would a man he never met before hate him on first sight? Apparently he had stayed too long for the man's liking, as said man gripped a bludgeon he had previously been carrying behind his belt and threatened to attack Naruto. In his panic, Naruto lost his footing and was forced to skid backwards awkwardly on his behind. He was momentarily dazed when he hit his head on the wall of the house behind him. When his head cleared, the man had already returned to his handcart and departed. Naruto could faintly make out a short conversation. "Daddy, who was that?" one of the children asked. "Keep away from that one, he's nothing but trouble. The likes of him are the reason you don't have a mother anymore." Naruto was confused. How could he have done something to the family of a man he didn't even know? His musings were interrupted when he felt something wet splash on his face. Apparently the clouds had decided to shed some of their load. He got up and continued on his way. Not even 5 minutes later he was wet to the bone and freezing from the cold drizzle. Finally, he managed to reach the orphanage, but there he found another problem. The door of the orphanage was locked and the windows barred. He pounded on the door and yelled, "Hey, I'm out here. Please let me in." He continued his yelling and pounding for several minutes until he was completely exhausted, but no one answered. He leaned against the door to catch his breath. Where was everyone? A loud thunderclap caused him to jump. The drizzle had increased to a heavy downpour with the occasional hailstone mixed in, and the wind had grown so strong it became difficult for Naruto to keep his balance. Random pieces of debris were flying through the air. The sky was almost black and still growing darker. The first thunderclap had only been the beginning. Lightning began increasingly to arc between the clouds. Naruto couldn't stop his own trembling. His small body's warmth was easy prey for the cold wind and rain. He needed to get out of the open. The gateway he was standing in offered almost no protection against the elements. Perhaps he could find shelter in the tool shack on the other side of the yard? It was normally secured with a big metal lock, but he knew a secret entrance on the back side where 2 boards were loose enough to create an opening. But he would surely be punished if they found him there. With a loud crack, a lightning bolt smashed into a building not too far away. That decided it. His mind made up, he turned around and ran across the yard. He was halfway there when suddenly his world went white and he knew no more. Nitsuko Kokawa, the matron of the orphanage, gritted her teeth in anger. Sometimes she wondered if her subordinates came up with their crap to deliberately annoy her or if they were really that stupid. She glared at the women standing before her desk in the small private room she had claimed as her own in the emergency shelter. "You 3 are telling me you lost a child in the park and noticed only now that we are safely sealed in the shelter and can't leave to look for him nor contact anyone? And not only any random child, but Naruto Uzumaki? The boy the Hokage delivered to us in person? The one kid whose disappearance he will assuredly take a special interest in should he learn of him vanishing? Especially if said vanishing happened during an emergency evacuation because of an approaching storm of unprecedented size?" 2 of the young caretakers had lost the somewhat smug expressions they had been sporting since they came into her room to report the incident. The third one was still smirking. "With all due respect, Nitsuko-sama, the chaos of the evacuation is a perfectly acceptable explanation. Children run away and get lost all the time. We simply were all too busy to notice. It just happened to be the Dem Uzumaki boy on this occasion." "A nice tale. Pray tell, what do you think will the Hokage do if the boy stays missing or resurfaces injured or dead? Do I need to remember you what happened to the nurse that had accidentally switched the milk powder with rat poison and was about to feed it to the boy? I realized that was before he was given into our care. But you surely heard of the fate of all the would-be assassins in the first few months of the boy's life?" Nitsuko asked. But you said we can do what we want with the boy." The formerly smirking woman had grown nervous at the lack of the support that she had expected from her superior, while the other 2 looked as if they were getting ill. "I said that what you do with the children is your responsibility as long as there are no serious injuries, and I hear nothing about gross abuse or neglect from one of my workers. I do not have time for all these details. If someone asks about the boy, you better have answers. I will not shield you from the consequences of your own actions." Nitsuko countered. The young women turned white as a sheet at that. "But we all thought the boy was with one of the others." One of the other caretakers said. "Spare me your excuses, they do not interest me. Save them for Yamanaka-san when he entertains you in his interrogation cells. Now leave me alone and better pray the boy turns up hale and healthy as soon as we return to the outside." Quote, after the 3 now thoroughly frightened young women rushed out of the small chamber and closed the door behind them, Nitsuko tiredly slumped back in her chair and pinched the bridge of her nose. As if she didn't have enough problems. On days like this she really felt her age. The greatest storm in recorded history was about to hit Konoha and the village was in lockdown. The storm was unusually fast approaching. They had received the storm warning only late this morning via messenger bird from an outpost to the south. It was barely enough time to make the most necessary preparations to secure the buildings of the village and evacuate the populace to the shelters. Personally overseeing the transfer of more than 200 frightened children to the emergency shelter was no fun. The fact that the orphanage didn't have a large enough basement to serve as shelter and they had to cross a significant part of the city didn't do a thing to make her task easier. That a group of children was away in the park and had to be recalled only added to her difficulties. The boy's disappearance was the icing on the cake. She stared at the ceiling and wondered what she had done to be saddled with these problems. In contrast to most of her civilian employees, she didn't hate the boy for being the container of the Kyuubi. Only utter morons without a shred of knowledge of the sealing arts would mistake the container with the contained. That didn't mean she liked him or wanted him anywhere near her other charges. He was far too dangerous for that. If it had been up to her, she would have the boy shipped off to some secure and secret location far from the village. There she would have him trained by carefully selected tutors to try and form him into a reliable weapon for the village without endangering the many citizens of Konoha should he lose control of his demon. Because of her own experiences during the Kyuubi attack, she kept her interaction with the boy to a minimum. Every time she looked at him, she was reminded of the moment the blasted demon fox took everything from her and had to suppress the urge to lash out at the boy. Doing such a thing would reflect badly on the reputation of her clan, and that pride was one of the few things she had left that kept her from committing suicide. While no expert, Nitsuko had some knowledge on the subject of Jinchuriki. They were aptly named. They were indeed the power of the human sacrifice. The entire life and mind of a child was sacrificed by sealing a demon into it in exchange for a shinobi with the potential of nearly unparalleled power. She recalled vividly the tales her great-uncle Shinji told them. The old man had originally been a civilian of Iwa and worked as an assistant of one of the local seal masters. In this role he had come to know the host of the Gobi, the five-tailed dolphin horse. The host at that time had been a young child, a boy from the Tsuchikage's extended family. He was one of the early hosts after all of the villages had begun to seal their beasts into humans. The boy had been a pleasant child, and his parents and the villagers cherished him as one of the future champions of Iwagakure. Then the murders had begun. Villagers and shinobi alike had turned up dead, with only their bones and clothes remaining. All searching for the culprit had been in vain, until one day the Tsuchikage, accompanied by some shinobi, had made a surprise visit to the house of the boy while his parents were away. The timing had been purely coincidental. They had wanted the boy's input on a present for his mother's upcoming birthday. But they surprised the boy as he was about to hide a large bag in the basement. Startled, he let it slip out of his hands. The contents spilled across the floor for all the visitors to see. They saw chunks of meat. Human meat. His secret discovered, the boy immediately moved to attack them with steam-based powers, injuring several of the shinobi. They were about to subdue him when his parents returned. Not understanding the situation, they shielded the boy against the attackers. Said boy played innocent and hid behind them. When it became clear in the ensuing argument that his parents would finally surrender him to the Tsuchikage for examination, the boy saw his chances for escape vanish. He proceeded to boil his parents alive with his steam before anyone could act. In the resumed fight, the boy was quickly defeated. While powerful, he was still several years from completing his shinobi training. He had no chance against several experienced opponents who were expecting his attacks. The following investigation revealed a hidden breach in the wall of the basement to a neighboring abandoned cellar. It was furnished as a storage area for meat. Apparently the boy had approached single targets that were eager to help, led them to an isolated area and killed them with a surprise attack, boiling them completely with his steam. Then he would scavenge all available flesh and leave. Nobody ever suspected him. He would feast on the flesh almost daily, seeking new victims when his supply ran out. The most chilling discovery had been that the boy was still mostly in control of his body and mind. He didn't remember what he did during the times when the demon took over and kept asking what happened to his parents. Luckily the demon was still bound and had only access to a fraction of its power, but could take over his host within a moment's notice. In the end, they had no choice but to transfer the demon into a temporary non-living prison until they figured out what was wrong with the seal, killing the boy in the process. Shortly thereafter, Uncle Shinji had deserted the village as well as his disgraced master, and after many adventures ended up joining Konoha and marrying into the Kokawa clan. This incident and similar occurrences in other villages were largely the source of the resentment towards Jinchuriki. As the seals grew more elaborate, it became less frequent an occurrence that a demon was able to wrest control from its host, but the fear and resentment remained. Nitsuko had personally seen what kind of damage a released demon could do in the Second Shinobi War. She had been sent on a solo observation mission to scout the lands contested between Kumo and Taki. From her well-concealed observation post on the slopes of a nearby mountain, she had observed an important mountain pass. Kumo had concentrated a considerable force to establish a large fortified camp in a valley where several mountain roads converged, thereby securing considerable territory. A small patrol from Taki had the misfortune to unknowingly run into them, slipping through the outer perimeter without either side noticing until they were trapped without a way out. The ensuing battle had been short and brutal. All but one of the Taki shinobi had been slain in a short amount of time. That last one had been different. He was far more powerful than his comrades, but ultimately even he lost against the overwhelming odds he faced. The battle had paused somewhat, with the lone heavily bleeding Taki shinobi standing in the center of a clearing surrounded by enemies. Nitsuko had seen it all clearly from her vantage point. The man had looked around, obviously assessing his hopeless situation. After some time the man had closed his eyes and turned his face towards the heavens and said something. She had been too far away to understand anything, and the distance was too great for lip reading. Then she had felt the chakra spike. It was far greater and more malignant than anything she had felt before in her life. The man had been shrouded in a sickly green glow that prevented her from observing the details, but what she had seen was enough to haunt her nightmares for years. The man's belly bulged until it was impossible large. With a wet tearing sound audible in the entire valley, the skin had finally burst, releasing an unidentifiable winged creature and uncountable strands of chakra into the sky. The creature had grown larger while absorbing all the strands and blobs of chakra that were floating in the air. That was when Nitsuko finally recognized the creature. It was the Nanabi, the seven-tailed beetle, and it was finally free after years of imprisonment. It proceeded to slaughter every living creature in reach. The Kumo nin never had a chance, and none managed to escape. Nitsuko had cowered in her hideout and suppressed her chakra as far as she was able while praying the entire time to her ancestors for the monster to overlook her. Someone must have listened, because she was still alive hours after the sounds of destruction subsided. When she finally found the courage to leave her shelter, the valley was an image of desolation. All trees had been uprooted and thrown around, broken rocks the size of houses littered the valley floor, and the fortress was a smoldering ruin. The Nanabi had been resting in the distance, half obscured by a mountain. Nitsuko had hightailed it out of the valley as quickly and stealthily as she could. The Nanabi had obviously taken a liking to the place and blocked all traffic for months until eventually some Taki nin managed to seal it again. That was the kind of danger Jinchuriki posed, and she had one under her roof. And not a random one, no, it was the one with the Kyubi sealed into him of all things, the most powerful of the demons. The Kyubi, the damned fox, had cost her everything. The Kokawa had been a shinobi family originally hailing from the land of rivers. They had taken a beating in one of the countless struggles before the time of the hidden villages, and the few survivors joined Konoha during the reign of the Shoden Hokage to avoid complete defeat. Some years after the end of the First Shinobi War, they had gained enough members and influence to attain minor clan status. She had been but a young girl at the time, but she still remembered the celebration. During the following years, the Kokawa had slowly increased their strength and reputation. They couldn't boast of any famous exceptional single ninja like other clans. No, most of their number never obtained a higher rank than Chunin. The first Jonin in their clan had earned his promotion shortly after the end of the Third Shinobi War. They had been all so proud of young Kaichi. Instead of focusing on producing a few shinobi of high skill, the Kokawa relied on hard work and reliability, as well as an unusual high percentage of clan members suited for the life of a shinobi. Most clans were lucky to have a third of every generation become ninja. In Nitsuko's clan this portion reached almost 60%. This fact was one of the contributing factors to one of the biggest political successes of her clan, the negotiating of a marriage contract on behalf of her niece Keiko with the Aburame clan. The Aburame had suffered heavy losses in the war against the Kamizuru, a rival insect-using clan from Iwa, and were searching for suitable marriage candidates to avoid inbreeding to a dangerous degree. Things had looked up for the Kokawa. The alliance with the Aburame promised further gains in reputation and influence. They survived the Third Shinobi War largely intact despite some losses, and the clan was prospering. Until the day the Kyubi came. In a single terrifying day, the beast had undone the work of generations and brought the Kokawa to the brink of extinction. Most of the clan's shinobi had participated in the delaying action fought against the giant monster until the Yondaime could take the field. None returned. Nitsuko herself had been staying in the clan compound together with the rest of the clan. They had believed the strong walls of the building would offer them some protection. That lasted until the Kyubi ran one of its tails across the village in an almost playful manner. The Kokawa clan compound had stood squarely in its path. One moment she was playing with the children to distract them from the danger, the next she had been buried under a mountain of rubble with several broken bones. Through a hole in the debris she could see directly into the Kyubi's eye, or so it seemed. She saw an unbelievable amount of hate and rage in there, but the most disturbing thing was something that seemed almost like joy because of the destruction it had caused. The great beast seemed to laugh at the destruction of all she held dear. In reality, the demon was quite a distance away and had probably looked in an entirely different direction, but due to its enormous size it appeared much closer. Shortly after, the Kyubi disappeared from view and Nitsuko fell unconscious. She had regained consciousness much later in the hospital. By then she was the only member of the Kokawa in Konoha still alive, and only one of two in all of the elemental nations. Her niece Keiko had been out of the village, a young genin on her first long-term mission. She had been sorely tempted to commit suicide in these dark days. Almost all she held dear had been destroyed. Only the thought of the damage to the clan's reputation and the anguish it would cause her dear Keiko had kept her from seeking this quick end to her pain. As soon as she was healed enough to move, she had immersed herself in work. The clan holdings had been completely destroyed. They still had some funds, but with only one woman of childbearing age remaining, the clan had no future anymore. They didn't even possess a bloodline or secret techniques that would make others want to join the clan. Luckily, the Aburame were still willing to uphold the marriage contract, even if the originally intended groom had died in the battle. Marriage would have to wait for quite some time as the next suitable candidate was only 9 years old at the time. The Kokawa clan might cease to exist, but their memory and heritage would still continue within the Aburame. After she had set the clan affairs in order, Nitsuko had found herself with nothing more to do. After a short search, she found employment with the help of her clan's good name as the matron of one of Konoha's orphanages. They needed all the help they could get after the influx of the many orphans left behind in the wake of the Kyubi attack. She had always loved caring for children, and the work gave her a new purpose. For a short while, she had felt better. Then the Hokage dumped the Kyubi container into her lap. By this point, the entire situation concerning the young Jinchuriki had already badly spiraled out of control. Nitsuko simply couldn't make sense of the actions of the Hokage. After the Yondaime had died defeating the Kyubi, it fell to the formerly retired Sandame to handle things again. In Nitsuko's opinion, the man had to choose between 3 reasonable options. Firstly, he could kill the child. Nitsuko knew that if the container was killed while the demon was still sealed inside, the death of the host would disperse the chakra of the demon. After a few years the demon would reform somewhere, but that would probably be another country's problem. This solution had its share of problems. For one, it was unknown if the Kyubi would seek revenge against Konoha after it reformed. To Nitsuko's knowledge, other demons in that situation hadn't done that, but it was still a possibility. Furthermore, it would deprive Konoha of a potentially valuable asset. If worst came to worst, another country would take possession of the Kyubi and use it against them in a future war. Secondly, he could treat him like the primed exploding tag he was and raise and train him in a secure location, preferably far from any settlement, and even more important, far from one Nitsuko Kokawa and her young charges. Or he could keep him visible in the village as a sign for Konoha's power. She would still keep him under permanent guard and apart from the normal populace most of the time, but it could be done, even if it would be hard on the child because of the general fear and hatred directed at the demon containers. The third option was to keep the boy's status as Jinchuriki secret and treat him like a normal child. Any abnormal occurrences that would arise could be shrugged off as some unknown bloodline resurfacing, especially with both of the boy's parents dead and the possible powers the Kyuubi would grant his host unknown. It would be grossly negligent to endanger the village in such a way, but it was still a rational course of action if one was a sentimental old fool. Unfortunately, the Sandame wanted to have his cake and eat it too. If the old monkey was unwilling to handle the boy like the extremely dangerous weapon that he was and instead insisted upon treating him like a normal child, announcing that he was the container of the Kyuubi and should be treated as a hero was completely counterproductive. He even trotted out that imbecilic argument that the boy was like a storage scroll and the Kyuubi a kunai and one shouldn't confuse the two. Nitsuko could only scoff at that comparison when she heard of it later, as did the vast majority of the audience at the time. For one, neither a kunai nor a storage scroll had minds of their own, with one mind being that of a century-old dangerous demon and the other one belonging to an impressionable child. To make matters worse, the seal had to connect the minds to some degree because otherwise it would be impossible for the boy to draw on the demon's power later. Within minutes of the announcement, large parts of the villagers called for the boy's death or banishment. Several people who had lost loved ones in the attack shifted the blame to the boy and tried to murder the infant. At least some of them probably acted out of a wish to protect the village from a potentially unstable Jinchuriki. After all, Konoha had never needed one of those before. Whatever their motivations, the Sandame had them all executed and enacted a law which forbid it to speak of the boy's status as Jinchuriki. It didn't do much good as far as Nitsuko could see, the knowledge had already spread. In a perfectly understandable defense reaction, most people now tried to ignore the existence of the boy and the danger he posed and wanted him to be kept away from them. The part of the populace that hated him settled for glares on the rare occasions when he left the orphanage. The boy was a few months old when the Sandame delivered him personally to her. The assassination attempts had ceased, and he wanted him to have a normal upbringing. He didn't say how she was supposed to achieve that with a severely overworked staff that either hated the boy or wanted nothing to do with him. Still, she had her professional pride and did what she could. She herself couldn't stand to be near the boy, but she made sure no excessive amount of harm came to him. She couldn't stop his isolation and mistreatment as her employees would simply revolt against her if she seemed to favor Naruto, but she could ensure it stayed on a bearable level. Unfortunately, the children picked up on the caretaker's attitude and further isolated the boy. Her only hope was that the boy would complain and be removed from their care if it continued long enough. Nitsuko resented the Sandame personally for dumping the boy into her lap and had a hard time to keep her cool when he showed up once in a blue moon to see how the child was doing. Not that she saw eye to eye with the man on a lot of other issues. She and her clan had always supported a more martial policy, and the Sandame with his peace-loving ways and soft approach had been one of their primary political opponents. It didn't help that during the Sandame's reign the civilian part of the population had been steadily gaining more power and was encroaching on the privileges of the shinobi clans that her own clan had worked so hard to obtain. They had been neutral to the Yondaime. The man had been a famed warrior of great skill, but he seemed likely to continue the Sandame's policies. The Kokawa had adopted a wait-and-see attitude, but his reign had been cut short by the Kyuubi before he could leave much of an impression. Her musings were interrupted by a knock on the door. "Enter." A young man stuck his head into her room. "Nitsuko-sama, the youngest children are restless. We would appreciate your help in calming them down," he said. "Too much trouble for you whippersnappers, No worries, I'm coming." Quote. With a sigh, Nitsuko stood up from her chair and left the room. She had work to do. Naruto awoke from the sun shining into his eyes. He sat up sleepily, blinking to dispel the vestiges of sleep. He stopped cold as he remembered running across the yard, a moment of white light and then, nothing. He hadn't the foggiest idea what happened after that. He must have fallen asleep at some point. "Oh no, I will be punished if I'm not sleeping in my bed," he thought. Now wide awake, he took for the first time stock of his surroundings. A sight of rare beauty greeted him as the entire world seemed to sparkle. The storm had obviously moved on, and the morning sun was sending its rays through the many holes in the clouds. Some rain still fell in the distance and reflected merrily the light of the sun, as did the countless water droplets on the trees and buildings. It seemed the entire world was covered in tiny gems. As Naruto turned around, he discovered a majestic double rainbow before the still dark western sky. He was stunned. In his entire life he had never seen anything so beautiful. He slowly pivoted on his feet to take in as much as possible of the fantastic sight. All too soon the sparkling faded when some clouds obscured the sun again, snapping Naruto out of his reverie and reminding him that he had to find a way back. It took him some time to figure out where he was. Luckily he could clearly see the Hokage Tower and some other landmarks. He was on the flat roof of a bakery he remembered passing several times on different excursions. He carefully climbed down the steep stairway on the side of the building, no mean feat for a 3-year-old. A short walk later and he was again standing before the closed door of the orphanage. Naruto sat down with his back to the door and waited for some of the caretakers to appear when his stomach growled hungrily. He tried his best to ignore the hollow sensation in his belly by trying to recall the wonderful sight he had witnessed. After a few minutes, he was fast asleep again. Several hours later he tried to find a resting position where his aching backside could get some relief. The boy had been found sleeping on the orphanage's doorstep by the returning staff and been immediately escorted into the matron's office. Naruto had to endure a long scolding by the matron followed by another scolding and a thorough spanking by the caretaker who had caused him to run away in the park. As further punishment he had been banned from lunch despite his last meal being breakfast 1 day ago. Naturally he hadn't been able to explain his behavior, he still lacked the necessary skill of speech. At least he had managed to eat something at supper even if he received as always a smaller portion than the others and some of the kids stole a large part of the remainder of his food. Now he was only hoping for some peace. "Hey midget, we heard you caused some trouble for the nice caretaker. We decided to show you what we think of little brats that make life more difficult for these poor women." Apparently some of the older children weren't satisfied with his punishment and had decided to take matters into their own hands. A sound thrashing and some time later Naruto was lying on his hard cot and tried to get some sleep while shivering under the thin blanket. Naturally his sleeping accommodations were the shabbiest in the entire orphanage, even if the other stuff wasn't that much better. "Why do they all hate me?" he whispered while burying his head in the pillow to hide his tears. An idea entered his mind. Perhaps by always acting cheerful and smiling at everybody he would be able to find some friends and acknowledgement? It had all been for nothing. An entire life's work, the labor of more than a dozen generations to help build the clan had all been for naught. Nitsuko took another big gulp out of the sake bottle sitting on her desk. Dozens of empty bottles already littered her office. She was dead. Her niece and last living relative was dead. A few days before, she had received the message from the Hokage's office. Her niece had been killed on a routine mission near the border by some foreign shinobi. Out of the 2 genin and 2 chunin of the patrol, only a chunin had made it back, and he probably wouldn't live much longer. He had clearly identified the attackers as belonging to Kumo, a fact which was further corroborated by the findings of the investigating team. There was proof beyond doubt that the Kumo Nin were the aggressors and that the location the incident had taken place was firmly inside the borders of the Land of Fire. Nitsuko had only continued living to see vengeance done before joining her husband, 4 children and 6 grandchildren in the afterlife. And now she knew she wouldn't even get that small comfort. One of her old acquaintances who worked in the Hokage's office had slipped her a copy of the old monkey's orders. Konoha would send a diplomatic note of protest and otherwise sweep the incident under the rug. No reparations would be demanded, let alone the extradition or execution of the culprits. Sarutobi wanted peace and considered almost no price too high for that purpose. There was even talk of signing a peace treaty with these bastards. After all her clan had done for Konoha, the villagers didn't even have the decency to avenge them. In this moment, something vitally important inside Natsuko's already alcohol-addled mind broke. Her sanity had taken a heavy hit in the wake of the Kyuubi attack and never really recovered, not least because she was forced in the proximity of the contained demon far too often. It had hung by a thin thread, and the recent events were enough to finally drive her over the edge. Of course, she had displayed such an impregnable facade to the outside world that nobody had even suspected that there might be a problem. The few mind healers that Konoha had were already overburdened by the countless overt cases and had no time to spare on the seemingly perfectly mentally sound woman. She began to laugh madly even while sobs shook her body to the core. And so it happened that a woman who had served Konoha loyally for decades even after a crippling combat injury had forced her retirement from the shinobi forces turned from loving the village to intensely hating it. Nitsuko was no longer able to differentiate between the population and the leadership. Both melted together into the concept of Konoha. The village had sacrificed the Kokawa and spit on their graves. They all deserved to burn in hell for that. But how to do it? She was already in her 50s and no longer physically capable of fighting. Since her injury more than 20 years ago, she couldn't even use chakra anymore. The memory of her last battle rose unbidden from the depths and forced her to relive the events. It had been a hopeless fight against a group of nuke nin that were their superior in numbers as well as in skill. They had been a group of 4 experienced chunin and 3 genin in hot pursuit of a jonin-level nuke nin who had murdered some tax collector and made off with the stolen money. It should have been a relative straightforward fight with superior numbers on their side. Unfortunately, the reports had understated the skill of the target and they had gotten bad intel to boot. Instead of surprising a lone shinobi, they themselves had walked straight into an ambush. Their target had joined a group of 8 other renegades that had a band of roughly 30 bandits supporting them. Before they knew what was happening, their Inazaka tracker had already gone down with a kunai through his throat and his partner incinerated by a fire technique. Then their enemies attacked from all directions. In the ensuing chaotic melee, she had seen comrade after comrade slaughtered until only she and 2 others were still alive. Some bandits had died, but all the enemy ninja were still in fighting shape. One of her comrades was lying on the ground slowly bleeding to death while the other had his right leg and arm incapacitated. Nitsuko herself had a few serious physical injuries but more importantly suffered from extreme chakra exhaustion. She had already been low on chakra before the battle because the group had used her above-average genjutsu talents to interrogate some prisoners and add some stealth to group. In the face of certain death, she tried to scrounge up some scraps of chakra to weave a genjutsu that would allow them to escape. Then it happened. Fueled by her desperation, she inadvertently opened an unknown number of the 8 inner gates in a completely uncontrolled fashion. The following surge of chakra overpowered her collapsing genjutsu, which promptly burned out the minds of all the enemies, leaving them as drooling idiots while she fell unconscious from the pain. Somehow her 2 comrades had survived and brought her back to Konoha. The medics had found extensive damage to her chakra system besides the physical injuries. Should she even try to mold the tiniest amount of chakra, it would almost certainly reopen the gates and kill her in a matter of minutes at the longest. That had been the end of her career as a kunoichi, but she had been able to deal with it. She had suffered the injuries while pursuing the ideals of her clan and gained no small amount of respect for it. She had spent the following years mainly enjoying her family life, caring for the young children of the clan and generally handing down her knowledge to the next generation. On the side, she had become politically active in a minor fashion. That lasted until the Kyuubi came. The image of a smiling boy drifted to the forefront of her mind. He had begun doing that since the storm a few weeks ago. She was sure. The damn Kyuubi was looking through the eyes of the boy and laughing at her. Laughing. A flash of inspiration struck her. She had been searching for a way to pay back Konoha while the solution had been sleeping in the same building the entire time. Her clan's vengeance was only a matter of releasing the Kyuubi. So simple. Perhaps she had misinterpreted the emotions of the monster 3 years ago. Could it be that the demon nursed a justified grudge against Konoha? Who knew what those bastards had done to the Kyuubi, and they should have protected the village better in any case. Then her clan wouldn't have died. The only remaining question was how to release the beast. She didn't know enough about fuinjutsu to manipulate the seal. Then she stumbled upon the obvious solution. Why, she could simply shatter the brat's mind like she had done to those men all these years ago. Without the boy's will to suppress it, the demon was practically guaranteed to take over. If she was lucky, she would even live long enough to witness the beginning of the destruction. Such brilliant ideas had to be inspiration from her ancestors and dead clansmen. It couldn't be another way. They all wanted revenge for their death, and she was the one to give it to them. When she listened carefully, she could even hear the voices of her dead children urging her on. Nitsuko carelessly threw the now empty sake bottle to the side and prepared to leave. She would fetch the brat and drag him into the small basement. It had a solid door that should give her the uninterrupted time to make her plan reality. The old matron wasn't even aware that she had scribbled some of her mad ramblings on a piece of sake-soaked paper. Far more important matters claimed her full attention, like the impending destruction of all the ungrateful bastards inhabiting Konoha. Oh yes, she would make them all pay. The Anbu code-named Chipmunk was on the second-to-last leg of her nightly patrol route when she felt a strong chakra spike in the vicinity. Quickly pinpointing it to the location of the orphanage, she sent her partner to call reinforcements while she investigated. Since the admittance of the Kyuubi container, the orphanage was designated as one of the more neuralgic points of the village. Each incident had to be handled with caution. Just as she jumped from the roof in front of the orphanage door, it opened and one of the caretakers came running out. "Help! Somebody please help us!" the clearly scared woman cried. Then she spotted Chipmunk and gripped hold of her cloak. "Anbu-san, Nitsuko-sama has gone mad. She has locked herself and the Uzumaki brat into the basement and barred the door. We heard her rambling that Konoha will pay for spitting on her clan and that she wants to release the Kyuubi." For a moment Chipmunk's heart seemed to stop. If the claims of the woman were true, Konoha was only moments away from catastrophe. The village wouldn't survive a second Kyuubi attack. "Stay here. Reinforcements are underway," she curtly instructed the woman before she ran at high speed into the orphanage. The chakra spike was still going strong and showed her the way through the unfamiliar corridors. She had to switch to running on the wall as more and more confused children that had been roused by the racket were spilling from their rooms. The ANBU's thoughts were whirling. Kokawa-san is classified as trustworthy and such behavior is completely unexpected from her. There is a far stronger possibility that some enemy of the leaf is impersonating or controlling her. I have to be prepared for everything. The backup will probably arrive too late to do much good. Shit, and here I hoped for a quiet night. Single quote. Finally she reached the stairway to the cellar and bounded down the steps. Chipmunk arrived in an anteroom with some doors leading in different directions. Some agitated orphanage workers stood in front of one of the doors in the room. One of them, a young well-muscled man, was holding his shoulder. He had apparently tried to batter down the door. All eyes focused on her as she came closer. "Oh, thank Kami you are here. Nitsuko-sama and the boy are behind that door. We can hear her rambling and the boy screaming, but the screams have stopped a few moments ago." Chipmunk motioned for silence and pressed her ear against the door. She could hear a woman talking and the characteristic sounds of fists and metal hitting flesh. "Killed all my family and won't even do anything to the murderers, but they will pay. And you will help me with my revenge, little fox." Illusion. Sum of all fears. Still not enough, Then it's time for my strongest technique. How's that for a change? Secret technique. Illusion. Road to madness. Ellipsis quote. That was bad. That was very bad. The child was obviously subjected to a horrible torture that would most certainly break or kill him, if it hadn't already, judging by the lack of screams. Chipmunk didn't know if one could successfully free the Kyuubi by destroying the mind of the container, but a crazy Jinchuriki was bad enough. She had to do something, and quickly. For that she needed room. The caretakers looked at her expectantly. Chipmunk immediately sent them away. The workers were civilians and would only get in her way. The door seemed to be made out of solid steel and was firmly anchored to the wall. Chipmunk desperately looked for a way in when inspiration hit her. The wall. It was made of old bricks and far weaker than the door. She had just the jutsu for such an opportunity. Quickly she made some hand signs and laid her hands against the wall. Lightning release. Wallbreaker. As a rectangular section of the wall roughly as high as she was began to glow, Chipmunk removed her hands and hurriedly pressed herself against the wall a short distance beside the affected area. With a muffled bang and the crackling of electricity, a section of the brick wall simply shattered, leaving a heap of debris on the floor. Before the dust had time to settle, Chipmunk jumped through the newly created opening. After leaving the dust cloud, she immediately took a defensive stance and tried to assess the situation. The mangled body of the demon container was lying unmoving in heap in a spreading pool of his own blood. He had several deep wounds and Chipmunk wondered if there was a single intact bone in his broken body in which a kunai still stuck, driven to the hilt into the flesh. A person that looked like the matron of the orphanage and was the origin of the now declining chakra spike was even now standing over him and kicking at his still form. A strong smell of sake was originating from the figure. Her hair was a tangled mess and her clothing was studded with wet-looking spots and spatters of blood. She seemingly hadn't even noticed the entry of the Anbu and had continued rambling the entire time. Why won't you come out, you damned fox? The boy's mind is shattered, his body broken, there's nothing in your way. I have it, you two are on their side. Bet they bribed you to destroy my family, huh? Chipmunk didn't want to attack the person frontally. The possibility that it was a disguised enemy was somewhat reduced but still there. She drew one of her special poisoned shuriken and shouted, "Cease your actions at once, you are under arrest for treason against Konoha." The woman stopped kicking the child and turned around. Chipmunk had to stop herself from recoiling at the sight. Madness shone from eyes that were leaking tears in two streams, while her mouth was distorted into the grotesque mockery of a grin. Strands of spittle were dripping from the woman's mouth and spasms constantly shook her body mixed with some blend of sobs and crazy laughter. Just as the figure had completed her turn, the chakra spike vanished. The woman clutched her, stopped breathing and simply keeled over soundlessly, landing on her face. The Anbu operative blinked behind her mask, but nonetheless launched her poisoned shuriken into the apparent corpse. The poison was a very special mixture that spread almost immediately through the body and caused a complete muscle lockup. It was non-lethal as long as the antidote was administered within 20 minutes. After that time the lung and heart locked up too, killing the victim. The madwoman seemed dead, but Chipmunk wasn't in the mood for taking chances. She hurried over to the tiny body and sharply sucked in her breath when she got a closer look at the damage, only to let it out as she detected a very faint heartbeat and shallow breathing. A normal child suffering from these injuries would be long gone, but somehow the boy clung to his young life. Puncture and slash wounds covered the body, and she could see the broken bones under his skin. His face was injured to such a degree that it appeared as a single large bruise. Wasting no time, she immediately began applying first aid. Then she felt it. It was the same terrifying feeling from a little more than 3 years ago that still caused her the occasional nightmare, but it was almost undetectable from any sort of distance. The earlier chakra spike from the woman had completely masked it, and even now she had to almost touch the boy to feel it. A minuscule trickle of the Kyuubi's chakra was constantly released by the boy. If she looked very hard she could see tiny motes of red light dancing in the wounds. Even as she frantically worked to stop the flow of blood, she noticed one of the many scratches sealing itself shut. Some of the deeper wounds seemed shallower as well when she got around to treating them. Apparently the demon tried to keep its host alive. It seemed an eternity until her backup of 6 Anbu operatives arrived. Without interrupting her work, Chipmunk quickly informed them of all that happened. 2 of the new arrivals proceeded to secure the corpse of the woman while the medic Badger had already joined her in the effort to save the container's life. 1 stood guard and the other 2 left the room after a short survey to keep unwelcome witnesses away. During their work they heard every now and again wet popping and scrunching sounds when something inside the boy's body tried to fix itself. Finally they had him stabilized enough to risk transport. A quick genjutsu later to prevent onlookers from identifying the victim, they left the room in direction of Konoha's hospital. Chipmunk planned to get very drunk as soon as she finished her report and got off duty. She had seen a lot of things in her career she rather wanted to forget, but the deliberate, cruel torture of such a young child took a prominent place in the gallery of atrocities she had witnessed, right beside the things she had glimpsed in one of the traitor Orochimaru's laboratories. How was it that this crap always happened in Konoha? Weren't they supposed to be the good guys? Organized thought had long become impossible for Naruto due to the intense pain that pervaded his body and mind. When the pain entered one of the periodic lulls, memories bubbled to the surface. He had been woken in the middle of the night by the matron and told to follow her. The lady didn't seem very well, rambled about some stuff he didn't understand and smelled strongly like cleaning supplies, but he had been too tired to question her. Naruto had followed her sleepily through empty corridors into the cellar. Underway they had met some patrolling caretakers that seemed surprised to see them. The matron had sent them away, but one had followed them. They had entered a room with no exits and the matron had closed and barred the door right in front of the nose of the man. That was when it had begun. The lady had done something strange with her hands and suddenly he couldn't move. Some pretty colored light had become visible around the matron. Then the pain had started. He didn't have any clear memories, but times when something rummaged painfully in his skull alternated with physical pain. Vague feelings of terror and fear and other emotions remained. Then the lull was over and the pain started again. Something seemed to poke sharply and painfully right into his head. Finally something gave way under the overwhelming onslaught, and Naruto's young mind shattered. The sounds of the world became faint and distant, only a vague feeling of unease remained. He was cold, so cold. He was falling. There was a cool wetness around him. Had he fallen into a puddle? Somebody scooped him up, carrying him away. Finally, the darkness claimed him, and he felt no more. Chipmunk was standing in a slightly uncomfortable silence before the Hokage. She had just finished giving her report of the orphanage incident and was waiting for the aged leader to react in some way. Beside her stood 3 people, or in one case sat on a comfortable chair, all connected in some way to the Uzumaki case. 2 of the people she had expected, but the last one's presence was a surprise to her. Kenchi Yakushi, Konoha's chief medical officer. No surprise here, he was the man responsible for Naruto after his delivery to the hospital. The Anbu Raven, the leader of ANBU's crime scene investigation unit. He had overseen the inquiry in the orphanage. Izumi Yamanaka, the perhaps best mind healer in all the elemental nations and the only one of them allowed to use a chair. Izumi's presence was surprising because she had retired decades ago due to her advanced age and nowadays rarely left her home in the Yamanaka clan compound. She was decades older than even the Hokage and one of the last living witnesses of Konoha's founding. In her youth she had been a fabled beauty who could beguile even the most steadfast shinobi and samurai. Even after her youth had fled she had been legendary for her skill in the Yamanaka mind arts. Today she was a shrunken, wrinkled and very frail shadow of the woman she had once been, but Chipmunk could still see remnants of the elegance she had once radiated according to the stories. After her retirement from active duty she had used her talents mainly in a healing capacity. After all, a shinobi village produced quite a number of people with mental scars. After many years of service she had completely withdrawn from the public after the Second Shinobi War, and even the Third War and the Kyuubi attack had only caused her to look at a few of the most difficult cases. Almost no one even knew that she was still alive. Chipmunk only knew of her because she had written an essay regarding Konoha's history of medic nins during her academy time. To get her to examine the Uzumaki boy must have cost the Hokage quite a few favors. Finally the Hokage spoke up. What is the current status of Naruto, Yakushi-san? Uzumaki-san is stable, thanks to the timely first aid. His wounds are healing at an astounding rate and don't seem to leave scars. If he continues to heal at this rate, he will be in perfect physical health in 2 days' time. We detected an increased level of the Kyuubi's chakra in his system, but that seems connected to the healing process. On the negative side, he is comatose and no prognosis can be made if and when he will wake up, or if his sanity will still be intact. The man reported. The seal seems unchanged, but we have no expert available who understands its intricacies. Thank you, Yakushi-san. My own opinion is that the seal is completely undamaged, but an expert will have a look at it sometime next week. Yamanaka Dono, what is your diagnosis of Naruto's mental state? The Hokage asked. Difficult to say. When I tried to delve into him the boy's mind had closed itself completely. To tell more I would have to use brute force to break the shell his mind has retreated into, but that would do irremediable damage. I found signs of heavy damage and severe trauma in the few parts one could get a look at. The person who did this to the child succeeded in breaking his coherent self by using a non-replicable mix of physical torture and unstable high-level genjutsu. No signs of mental contamination by the Kyuubi, so the seal is still intact in that regard. Is there anything we can do to help him? The only thing we can do is wait. He will either wake, or he will not. There is no telling what might be left of his mind. If he is lucky he will suppress or completely lose the memories from the attack and regain full functionality. Children have astoundingly flexible minds. There is nothing else I can do until that time. The Hokage nodded. I thank you for your efforts, Yamanaka Dono. You have my gratitude. Izumi waved him off and slowly stood. It does these old bones good to do some work from time to time. I'll take my leave now. You may call me again when the boy wakes. Her face twisted into a toothless grin. "It won't even cost you any future favors, young man, though I do like my men young." All occupants of the office stared at her retreating form in shock. It didn't happen every day that a 60-year-old was called a young man, or that a woman nearing 100 years of age implied favors. After the silently chuckling Yamanaka elder had left the office, everyone got back to business. "What conclusions have you reached regarding the incident, Raven?" "We have verified that the dead body indeed belonged to Nitsuko Kokawa. Evidence found in her office suggests that she almost snapped upon receiving the message of the death of her last living relative. Somehow she learned of our response to the suspected perpetrators. The perceived lack of retribution on our part drove her over the edge into insanity. She blamed Konoha for the death of her clan and planned to release the Kyuubi to destroy the village. For that purpose she subjected Uzumaki-san to a combination of physical torture and mental attacks by way of genjutsu to allow the Kyuubi to take over. The reported jutsu names are incongruent with the evidence the chakra sensor on the investigation team found. After consulting her file and allowing for the results of the autopsy, it seems she voluntarily opened the inner chakra gates in an uncontrolled fashion to allow her the use of chakra and boost her skills. The resulting genjutsu bore only a passing similarity to the nominal techniques because of random power fluctuations. The injuries on Uzumaki-san's part have already been reported. The earliest injuries were inflicted to cause the maximum of pain but do little actual damage. The later injuries were inflicted with an increasing sloppiness until it degenerated into a senseless beating. Kokawa-san died after the boost from the opening of the gates subsided. The attack is the first attempt of violence against Uzumaki-san since the initial rush immediately after the sealing. There is neither proof nor indication of the involvement of any third parties," replied the Anbu captain in a monotonous voice. The Hokage closed his eyes and was silent for a while, obviously pondering on the best course of action. After about 5 minutes he opened his eyes. "I hereby declare the events surrounding the attack on Naruto Uzumaki an A-ranked village secret. No mention is ever to be made to parties not aware of the true circumstances. Raven, please see to it that the orphanage workers are informed of this." The cover story for the workers is that an unknown shinobi attacked Kokawa-san and controlled her to capture Naruto. She managed to resist and was killed. The perpetrator committed suicide when Anbu arrived. I want to be immediately informed of any changes in status of Naruto. Dismissed. Naruto's fractured mind was drifting somewhere between sleep and reality. He didn't seem to be able to concentrate on his surroundings or move, nor could he follow a strain of thought to its end before it dissolved. His thoughts emerged less common and dissolved earlier as time went by. A voice, or were it two, were drifting in and out of his focus, but he couldn't even grasp the meaning of the words that were understandable. Completely unforeseen. What? Too early, not ready. Mind fracturing further, damned seal, interference. Can't help him? Need, foundation, extreme measures, consequences? Do it. The incoherent mess that was once the mind of a young boy named Naruto Uzumaki felt something alien reach deep inside of it. The next moment, everything went dark. He drifted in blissful nothingness with no sense of self or time, no memories and not even much of a mind in general. Only a steady beat was his constant companion, that and a feeling of all-encompassing warmth. On some day that changed, he was suddenly pushed around and squeezed through something narrow. Where during his previous existence he was completely weightless, he now felt far too heavy to move. He was lying on a hard surface and covered by something slimy. Something rough and wet was licking him all over, and then he was embedded in some soft, warm fur that wrapped tightly around him. He felt secure. A scent filled his nose that he began to associate with one concept: mother. He had no sense of time, alternating between sleeping and eating. When he grew hungry he only had to squirm around a bit and find a teat on his mother's body to suckle some delicious milk. From time to time his mother would lick him with her tongue. It tickled. Sometimes another scent would join them, different from his mother, but somehow similar. Additional exotic scents clung to the visitor. Another concept engraved itself in his developing mind: father. One day he found himself alone in his home. His mother was gone, and he quickly began to feel cold and frightened. He pressed himself against the relatively warm ground to preserve what little warmth he had. Suddenly his mother was back, and he was once again nestled in his warm, soft, furry heaven. Everything was well again. In the following time mother left him again several times, but he got increasingly better at dealing with it. A persistent itch somewhere on his head marked the day the world changed for him. For the first time, he opened his eyes as well as his ears and saw and heard. He was in a sizable burrow with several tunnels leading away. Dim light shone through some of them, faintly illuminating his surroundings. His mother was a great mass of fur coiled around him. In the following days he began to explore the world around him. At first he had a hard time walking around on his shaky legs, but he got steadily better. He also saw his father for the first time when he brought some dead interesting-smelling animal for his mother to eat. The leavings of the meal tasted yummy as he licked them. He began to play with his parents, jumping on them, wrangling and trying to catch their tails. With time, he grew bolder in his wanderings through the tunnels and even cautiously approached one of the exits to the surface, only to be carried back by his vigilant mother. As soon as his teeth grew he began to chew on everything, or at least he tried. The attempts to chew on his parents' tails or other body parts earned him some bops on his head. He began to eat more and more of the prey his parents brought home, sampling all the different tastes. Worms, insects, mice, hares, bunnies and different birds all enriched his diet. Fluffy bunnies, yum yum. Finally, the time to leave the burrow for the first time came. Chaperoned by his parents he left the dark tunnels and entered the bright surface world. The burrow entrance was located on a hillside hidden behind some bushes. A glade opened before them, surrounded by high trees. The most impressive things he noticed were the 100 different colors. In the gloom of the cave it had been impossible to differentiate them, but here it was different. Flowers of all colors were gently swaying in the afternoon breeze under a blue sky dotted with white clouds. The air was rich with thousands of scents and the noises of unknown animals reverberated throughout the clearing. He also got a good look at his parents. His mother sported a deep red gold fur, while a silvery gleam ran through the dark pelt of his father on his every movement, making it very difficult to pinpoint the actual color. It seemed to be black, gray or even pure silver, depending at which angle one looked. In contrast to his parents, his own fur was a bright yellowish color. Soon a butterfly captured his attention as it settled itself squarely on his nose before taking to the air again. Not wanting to let the little insect get away with that display of blatant disrespect, he bounded after it to catch it between his paws. Quickly he lost track of his surroundings in his pursuit and missed a step, causing him to tumble down the hillside and face first into a stand of flowers. The resulting cloud of pollen made him sneeze several times and enabled the infamous butterfly to get away. After shaking his head to free it from the loose pollen, he returned to his parents' side, who had watched him in amusement. Sometime later he began to feel tired and was escorted back into the tunnels, but not before his father had caught a tasty mouse and shared it with them. In the following days and nights the trips to the outside grew longer. Sometimes both his parents would leave for a while, but it didn't frighten him anymore. He began to accompany them on their trips, learning to hunt and move silently. After a while he had the feeling that he could survive on his own, but still preferred to stick to his parents. Finally they signaled him to go along with them when they intended to leave the burrow for good. It was time to move on, and he eagerly followed his parents into the darkness of the night. It was warm and he didn't hurt anymore. These were Naruto's first impressions as his mind rose from the darkness, a strange dream about foxes fading from his consciousness. He still was very tired and wasn't fully awake. A smell like a summer day in the woods filled his nose. Not wanting to open his eyes, he squirmed a bit around. Under him was something incredibly soft that radiated warmth. On his back he felt two weights that had tightened slightly when he shifted his position. His bed rose and fell rhythmically, as if it was breathing softly. "It's like someone is holding me. This must be a dream," he thought sleepily. "No one has ever held me like this. But it feels good. I just hope the dream lasts a little longer, just a little longer." He snuggled closer to whatever it was and let sleep take him once again. The thing he missed was a soft female voice speaking. "Sleep and heal, my little one, you aren't alone anymore." After the words faded away, only the soft breathing of the child and woman remained. The woman was sitting seemingly on thin air in an endless expanse made of formless shadow. No ground, no sky and no objects were visible, just darkness all around. An indeterminate amount of time passed before some of the shadows grew denser before parting, thereby uncovering a third figure. The man, and it looked like a man, approached the pair. He took a seat in the nothingness directly besides the woman and put his left arm around her body. "Is it done?" asked the female. The man nodded. Yes. Even now his mind is slowly reintegrating. It was more difficult than anticipated. The seal was rooted far more strongly in his mind than I expected. I had to completely isolate it from his mental processes by creating a false mind bubble around it. It almost triggered some contingency functions several times. But he is safe now? From the influence of the seal? Perfectly. I will have to study it more. The pressure it exerted on the boy's mind was peculiar. Aside from the fact that it fractured his damaged mind even more and would have destroyed him completely in the end, there is something suspicious about it. There is simply no reason for a demon imprisoning seal to have that many connections into the container's mind. Unfortunately, I don't know anything about Fuinjutsu to discern the true purpose. I will have to observe the effects it has on the false mind to determine the basics. The man noticed that Naruto had begun to drool and pulled a tissue from nowhere to wipe the boy's mouth. "What of the plan? Can we still salvage it?" Chuckling mirthlessly, the man replied. "Love, the plan is so far off the tracks that its only worth is that of a thought exercise. It is no longer viable. The timing and manner of the attack was most unfortunate, especially because I didn't foresee anything like it. Our transformation process was incomplete when Naruto's mind was shattered. We were simply not ready to brace the waking world, and the loss of his mind would have caused the seal to collapse. Combined with what I had to do to save us all, he is now tightly bound to us, especially to you. If I tried to leave this realm and go into the real world, I would pull you with me. That in turn would violently rip the seal to pieces. You would suffer injuries that might take more than a century to heal, but Naruto would be completely obliterated." The woman tightened her grip around the boy. "Never. I will not let harm come to the child." Suddenly she seemed to realize something. "Why do I feel so much for the boy? Before, he was only my jailer. I hoped to never see him again, but now it's different. Now I want to see him happy, watch him grow up and never be really separated from him." The answer to that is very easy. You love him like a son. In a sense you are his mother, as I am his father. He will probably never remember, but you gave birth to the new him in a very real sense in that small fox burrow. The foundation of his mind was shattered, and had to be replaced by a new sense of self. The connection with foxes we picked up was the best way for that. We couldn't simply graft one of our own countless memories onto him. The format isn't really compatible. Maturation as a human would have taken too long and would make the reintegration more complicated. A small part of both of us is now ingrained into him, but aside from that he will be pretty much like before. He sighed before continuing. For all the power we have and how high we tower about the mortals, it is still possible for beings like us to form emotional bonds. It is a sign of humility I decided to keep. Additionally, I noticed the boy was very lonely when I made my improvements to his mind. The fragments of his mind practically jumped at us when he felt our closeness. Prying them away would only have done more damage. Improvements? She narrowed her eyes. What have you done to him? The man was quick to defend himself. I was already busy with repairing his mind. Making a few improvements was only logical. Nothing major. A sly glint entered his eyes. Besides, don't think I didn't notice what you did to his body when you healed it. Now it was the female's turn to look embarrassed. Well, what's done is done. What do we do now? The boy still needs time to fully heal. We keep him here as long as we can. In the meantime, we'll have to develop a new plan. One thing is certain, we won't get out of here anytime soon. The woman sniffed. This place is not fit to bring up a child. We'll have to redecorate. I agree. The best way is to start small and comfortable. We can introduce him to our more unconventional aspects as soon as he is ready. What should we let him call us? Just pick some names at random, it won't matter in the end. Now, let's begin with the redecoration. With these words, color spread outwards from the pair. Grass covered the formerly non-existent ground. A blue sky appeared and trees shot up and grew to monumental size in seconds. A whole new world was building itself. Naruto woke to the smell of cooking. He felt weak like never before in his life. It was exhausting to even turn his head. Slowly he tried to make sense of his situation. The last thing he clearly remembered was following the matron of the orphanage through empty corridors in the middle of the night. After that everything was blank apart from a dream of someone holding him. Currently he was lying in the most comfortable bed he had ever experienced. Whatever it was that he was lying on was very soft, and the blanket covering him was thick and fluffy. With a supreme effort of will he forced his eyes open. His current bed was almost triple the size of the orphanage cot. It was located in a middle-sized alcove with wooden walls. He could see a wardrobe and several empty shelves. The alcove opened to a larger room. A fur curtain served as partition, but it was currently drawn open. From his limited perspective he could only see a large table and a window in the far wall behind it. Sounds he associated with a kitchen and the humming of a woman could be heard, but their origin remained out of his field of view. He tried to call the unknown person, but instead of the expected shout only a dry cough came out of his mouth. Only now he noticed that his throat was completely parched. Apparently the cough was loud enough to gain the attention of the person in the room, because the humming as well as the other sounds stopped. A short time later the most beautiful woman Naruto had ever seen came into view. She was clad in a simple and modest brown dress with an apron that nonetheless distinctly displayed her ample curves. Curiously she wore no shoes. A thick mane of red gold hair that fell to her slim waist framed a lightly tanned face from which ruby eyes examined him with concern. With a few quick steps she stood beside his bed and bent down to him. Because she was so close, Naruto could clearly smell her scent. It was the same one he had dreamt of. Before he could do anything with this insight, the woman began to speak and interrupted his line of thought. "You are awake, good. How do you feel?" she asked Naruto in a concerned voice. He tried to answer, but only a dry cough came out. "Do you want something to drink?" Naruto managed a weak nod. "Wait a moment, I'll be right back." With that she stood and left, only to return a short time later with a wooden cup and a pitcher in her hands. "Drink slowly," she told him when she placed the cup at his lips. Upon tasting the wonderfully cool water, Naruto soon disregarded the warning and began to gulp down the water as fast as he could. Predictably he choked when he tried to breathe and drink at the same time. The resulting coughing fit sprayed water all over him and onto the woman. Naruto cringed internally. When something similar happened in the orphanage he was always shouted at and punished. Instead of the expected outburst, the woman simply put the cup down upon the floor, produced a piece of cloth from her apron and proceeded to gently clean first Naruto and then herself. "Be more careful, little one. There is enough water for you to drink, no need to be hasty." "Do you want some more?" the woman mildly admonished him while wiping his face. Seeing Naruto's nod, she filled the cup once again and held it to his lips. This time Naruto heeded the warning, and after emptying an additional cup of water he felt much better. Deciding to test his voice, he rattled off a series of questions. "What happened? Who are you? Where am I?" The woman chuckled. "You may call me Yuko, and you're in the home belonging to me and my mate." Her expression grew serious. "You have been badly hurt, and we took care of you." "What about the orphanage?" Naruto asked. Yuko stroked his cheek with one hand. The action was totally unexpected for Naruto, but the accompanying feeling was so good that he leaned into the hand. "Don't think about them now, first you have to get better. Sleep for now, I will bring you something to eat as soon as it is ready." Suddenly Naruto noticed how tired he had become. The short conversation had already drained his meager endurance, and he went out like a light. An indeterminable time later he was disturbed in his sleep when Yuko shook him gently awake. She had seated herself on a stool on the side of his bed with a plate of steaming soup in her lap and fastened a piece of cloth as bib around his throat. The smell alone made his mouth water. The woman used her breath to carefully cool down the soup one spoon at a time before feeding it to him. It tasted nothing like anything he had ever eaten before. The food in the orphanage was bland at best. On most days they got some unappetizing gruel made from rice and some vegetables or a thin soup with hard bread. The soup he was now eating belonged to a whole different world of food. For one, he could actually see the pieces of vegetables floating in the soup, even if he couldn't identify them. A dozen different herbs contributed to the unique aroma. Naruto was shocked when he bit on a piece of meat. Actual meat. They got meat perhaps one time per month in the orphanage, and his portion was usually stolen by the other children. All too soon his stomach was full and the plate empty. As Yuko began to remove the bib and plate, Naruto was already fast asleep. The morning sun shone through the window when he woke again. Feeling a bodily need, he tried to get up. With some difficulty he managed to free himself from the blanket. That was the first time he noticed he was only wearing a very long nightgown. Where had his clothes gone? Shoving thoughts about his wardrobe to the side for the moment, he swung his legs out of the bed and tried to stand. Finally he stood on his own feet. He managed to take 3 shaky steps until the room began to spin rapidly. Losing his balance, he fell against the wall before sliding to the floor. Apparently he had made enough noise to be noticed by Yuko, who hurried to the source of the disturbance. Upon seeing Naruto sitting on the floor intact, she shook her head. "You know, you can call me if you need something." She was about to carry Naruto back to his bed when he regained his senses enough to say something like, "I need to go to the potty." Yuko stopped in her tracks. "Oh, then I guess I'll have to show you the way." She shifted her grip so that Naruto rested safely against her shoulder before carrying him out of the room. Due to his dizziness, he didn't really remember much of the way to the bathroom. After taking care of his sanitary needs, he was carried back to his bed. He was relieved to be able to lie down again. Yuko left him for a few minutes to fetch breakfast. It consisted of some freshly baked bread, tea, and a curious yellow translucent substance. Naruto watched as she cut off a slice and smeared the yellow goo on it before pressing it into his hand. For a moment he eyed the slice warily, but hunger got the better of him. After his first bite he stared at the slice in wonder before devouring the rest. He looked at the smiling woman. "Sweet." Yuko chuckled. "That's honey, Naruto. One of the many things you can find in the woods if you know where to look." Soon he was fully sated and reclined in the bed. Yuko left him, but he could hear her working. He felt somewhat tired, but not enough to go back to sleep. Instead he tried to think about his situation. Obviously he had been badly hurt even if he didn't remember it. His current weakness was a sure sign of that. Naruto would have expected to be taken to the hospital as had happened a few times in the past, but perhaps he had already been released. They didn't like him in the hospital. But how had he ended up in the house of the nice woman? Nobody was ever nice to him, apart from the old man that had visited him a few times. Some of the caretakers were less hostile than others, but never friendly. Perhaps they were overcrowded and he had been sent here to heal completely before returning to the orphanage. His thoughts were interrupted when he heard the opening and closing of a door. A figure passed his field of view too quickly for him to make out any details. He could hear a conversation in a low tone, but the words were too indistinct to pick up. Shortly after the conversation ended, a man entered Naruto's alcove and seated himself on the vacant stool. As far as Naruto was able to see, the stranger was completely clad in leather. Boots, trousers and a vest were all made from animal hide in different shades of brown. A pale clear-cut face with short cropped black hair showed a friendly expression. Pale yellow eyes examined him for a moment before the man began to speak. "Hello young man, my name is Daiki and I'm glad to finally see you awake. I have a little something for you." With these words, he produced a fox doll from behind his back and held it out to Naruto. The doll was surprisingly lifelike and made from a combination of cloth, leather and fur. Naruto stared at it for a long moment. He had never owned any real toys in his life, only the random stuff he managed to pick up. "For me?" he asked in a disbelieving voice. Daiki nodded. "It is yours. Go on, take it." With a feeling of awe he carefully took the doll from the man's hand. After the doll made no move to suddenly disappear, Naruto hugged it close to his chest. It was really ideally suited for intensive cuddling. With tears in his eyes he looked up to the man who sported a smile. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. It was no trouble. Every child should have something like that," he said and stood up. "Get better soon, young man." When he left the alcove, the man was joined by Yuko, who had watched the exchange with a soft smile. Naruto felt very happy and very confused at the same time. People who were nice to him and even gave him presents were a totally new experience. They even smiled at him. Nobody did that. Naruto fell asleep before he could organize his confused thoughts, his new fox doll clutched tightly in his arms. It was 2 days later when he was finally well enough to leave his bed. In addition to a shorter shirt, he wore now some trousers from the same material as Yuko's dress. He was still unsteady on his legs and couldn't stand on his own for more than a minute, but he was slowly getting better. Most times he was seated in a chair and watched Yuko go about her household chores. Daiki was away most of the time on some unspecified business, but when he returned he would often bring plants and meat with him. Naruto hardly felt any boredom, it was too interesting to see the woman working. On the occasions when she left the house he played with his still unnamed toy or napped a bit. She always made conversation with him. When she didn't ask about his life or what he liked, she told him about herself and what she was doing. Apparently she and her husband lived alone in the forest and supported themselves through hunting and gathering. The room he saw the most of was the main room adjacent to his alcove. A wooden table with several chairs stood in the middle of the room, while a large stone fireplace took up most of the space of one wall. A stone workbench and several cupboards that held tableware and cooking supplies occupied another wall. Multiple furs covered the floor and empty spaces on the walls. 2 windows let light into the room, but Naruto couldn't see through them because they were made of parchment. A large heap of soft furs a short distance from the fireplace was often used by the couple to relax for some time in the evenings. The room had 4 doors. One led to the outside, one to the couple's bedroom, the third to a storage area and the last to a passageway where some firewood was kept. The other end of the passageway led to the bathroom. Unless they specifically heated water on the fire, the running water that was somehow funneled to the bathroom and to a small basin in the stone bench was very cold. But Naruto was no stranger to cold water. He was in fact very surprised when the water was heated for him. Naruto was still too weak to wash himself properly, but Yuko had apparently no problems to do it for him. It had been a long time since someone had bothered. The caretakers had stopped since he was barely capable of doing it himself. It was somewhat embarrassing, but very nice on the other hand. The caretakers had always scrubbed him almost raw, but Yuko was much gentler. The first time he was able to eat without help was embarrassing in a different manner. He was wolfing down the food as fast as he could, when Yuko cleared her throat and asked him if he always ate like that. Her tone of voice made it clear that she obviously disapproved. Naruto looked up from the food with a questioning expression. What was wrong with eating as fast as he could? The main thing was that the food landed in his belly before someone could steal it. When he said as much, Yuko made a face. We have to work on that. Nobody here is going to steal your food, there is more than enough for all of us. You can't really savor the taste if you gobble it down as fast as you can. Thus began a series of lessons in basic table manners. Close your mouth while you chew. No talking with a full mouth. Chew carefully before you swallow. Don't play with your food. Naruto had problems at first because nobody had ever bothered with teaching him that sort of stuff, but Yuko was patient. Luckily his bad habits hadn't had the time to become ingrained too strongly, and soon enough his eating behavior had improved to Yuko's satisfaction. 5 days after he had first woken, the pair judged him healthy enough to leave the house for the first time. Naruto had spent entire weeks within the walls of the orphanage without seeing the outside once, meaning he hadn't actually thought of pushing for leaving the house himself. He didn't want to do anything that might upset the nice couple. Because he was still unsteady on his feet, Daiki picked him up and carried him out of the door. At first Naruto was blinded by the bright light, but as soon as his eyes adjusted he took in his surroundings. The house they had just left had a roofed front porch with a bench. He could see a large wooden shed and the entrance to an underground building. Grass covered the ground between the buildings except for a few well-worn paths, and he could see the edge of a forest a few dozen meters away. As he was carried around, he noticed that the dense forest bordered the cottage on 2 sides, while lush meadows stretched into the distance on the other 2 sides. There were no animals, but a carefully kept small kitchen garden was located beside the cottage. A small brook originated from a rocky knoll behind the cottage. Some of the water was artfully diverted into the house by wooden constructs. It was totally different from what Naruto had seen inside the village. Normally there were always people around, but not here. It was peaceful. The air was fresh instead of saturated with human smells, and the noise of the village was totally absent. Now, what do you think about our home, young man? It's great. What's in there? Naruto asked while pointing to the shed and the door. That's my workspace for stuff that is too messy to do inside the main house, and that door leads to a storage house. I'll show them to you another time. What do you do for work? Well, I mostly hunt in the woods for meat and hides and gather edible plants on the way. Yuko normally accompanies me or leaves on her own, but since you are with us she mostly stays at the house. The few things we can't get ourselves we swap the valuable pelts and herbs for. Naruto was carried around a bit more until they stopped at a field of flowers a short distance from the house. After being set on a blanket that Yuko had carried with her, Naruto examined the flowers from a close distance. They were much larger and more colorful than the few flowers he had seen in the village. When he bent forward to better catch the smell of an especially beautiful flower, he overbalanced and fell face first into the field. Nothing serious happened aside from a sneezing fit from all the stirred-up pollen. Why do I have the feeling this has happened before? He felt himself picked up by strong arms. Yuko and Daiki sat side by side and put him on top of their touching legs. It was quite comfortable for Naruto. He leant back against the warm bodies of the couple and simply relaxed while watching the wind play with the grass. It didn't take long and he was fast asleep. In the following days he became steadily more mobile, though he rarely left the watchful gaze of Yuko for any length of time. One day a cauldron of stew was cooking above the fire. Naruto was alone in the room, for Yuko had left to gather some ingredients from the storeroom. He was already hungry, and the stew smelled so delicious that he simply couldn't resist, although he had been told to stay away from her cooking utensils. He stood before the cauldron and was about to grip the rim of the big black cauldron when his hand was forcefully slapped away. It hurt. When he looked up, he saw Yuko with a furious expression. She had never been angry with him and had never hurt him. Had she only acted as if she liked him? Tears began to well in his eyes when he suddenly found himself enveloped in a hug. What were you thinking? You could have hurt yourself. Naruto blinked. It sounded almost as if the woman was about to cry. And she wasn't angry with him because he tried to get at the food, but because he could have hurt himself? I only wanted to taste the stew. I would have stayed away from the fire and cooled the soup down before eating, he said. Yuko ended the embrace and looked into his eyes. You don't understand how you would have hurt yourself, do you? Upon seeing Naruto's blank look, she sighed. I have to show you. Don't touch anything and watch closely. Yuko picked up one of the strings of raw meat that she had prepared for later and showed it to Naruto. That piece of meat is like your finger. Now watch what happens. With these words she let the meat touch the cauldron at the same spot where Naruto's hand would have. Immediately a sizzling sound started. A short time later Yuko removed the meat and showed it to Naruto. It was obvious that it had been barbecued, with some spots torn off because they stuck to the cauldron. That would have been your hand, and trust me, burn wounds hurt a lot. It isn't just the fire and the soup that are hot. The fire heats the cauldron, and the cauldron in turn heats the soup. Naruto gulped. I'm sorry. Yuko embraced him again. It's all right, little one. Please listen to me or Daiki in the future. We have always a reason when we forbid you from doing something. He only nodded. This was only the most recent in a string of new experiences for him. At no time in his life had somebody actually cared about his well-being and taken the time to explain things to him. In the 10 days he had stayed with Yuko and Daiki, his vocabulary and understanding of the world had already expanded massively. Bit by bit he began to completely trust the couple. A woman with wild hair was standing above him. She formed strange signs with her hands, and the world dissolved into a jumble of colors. Monsters emerged, biting and scratching him. He screamed. A burning pain started in his arm, and the woman was back with a knife in her hand. She gibbered incoherently while drool dripped from her mouth. Again she made some signs, and he was surrounded by insects that stung him all over. A hard impact hit him, and he could feel something inside of him break. The woman was back again, and her knife came closer and close. Naruto woke screaming in the middle of the night in his sweat-drenched bed. Yuko held his body while Daiki had his arms in a tight grip. As soon as he saw that Naruto was awake, he immediately let go. Terror from the dream and relief that it was only a dream flooded Naruto, and he began to cry. Hush, little one, you are safe. Yuko whispered while cradling him in her arms. It took a long time for Naruto to calm himself. The couple took him to their own bedroom, and huddled against the warm body of Yuko he was finally able to sleep again. The next morning after breakfast the three sat together at the table. Naruto, we have to talk about last night. No, Naruto didn't want to talk about the dream, he wanted desperately to forget. Yuko took his hand into hers. Please, little one, it's important, please tell us what you saw. He didn't really want to, but couldn't resist the pleading in the end. After he finished with his recollection the pair shared worried glances. Daiki sighed. It wasn't a dream, it was a memory. What? Naruto didn't understand. The woman you saw was the orphanage matron. I don't know why, but she went mad and wanted to hurt you. And she did, very badly in fact. You have suppressed most of the memories, but they are still there. I can do something about them, but you have to let me. Do you trust me? That was a difficult question. Did he trust them? Normally he trusted nobody, but these two people had been nothing but nice to him the entire time he was with them. Yes, for the first time in his life he trusted some adults. Yes, I do. Daiki and Naruto sat face to face on the floor. The man took Naruto's head into his hands and began to hum in a deep tone. Something cool and soothing seemed to touch the insides of his head. The painful memories faded until he didn't remember the details anymore. Additional sets of torture bubbled up and were treated the same way. It took hours, but finally they had worked through all of his repressed memories. Naruto still remembered being hurt, but the details and the accompanying pain and emotions were gone. It felt like an invisible weight was lifted from his shoulders. There, that's done. Now, why don't we play a game of tag? Naruto tapped Daiki, shouted, "You're it," and ran out of the door. Why you little? I'll get you. Days came and went, and Naruto began feeling truly at home. During the day he would help with some minor chores, watch Yuko work or play with his toys or one of the adults. Aside from the fox, Daiki had gifted him a number of wooden blocks that he used to build all sorts of structures. Every few days he would get a new small wooden carving in various shapes. At the moment he owned a bear, a boar, a wolf and a duck. In the evenings they sat together on the bench and watched the sun disappear beyond the horizon. Each night before he went to sleep, Daiki or Yuko would tell him a story. Most featured the adventures of some animals and conveyed a lesson about life. Naruto could hardly believe how good his life was now. One evening he was playing with his miniatures on the floor before the fireplace while Yuko and Daiki reclined on the pile of furs. He reenacted the wolf attacking the duck a bit too enthusiastically, and the duck went flying into the room. With a slight shake of her head, Yuko stood and retrieved the figurine. "Be a bit more careful, little one, otherwise the duck might fly away," she said when she gave the piece back to Naruto. "Thank you, mommy." Everyone froze and the adults looked at him with big eyes. Naruto realized what he had said and began to panic. The one time he had mistakenly called a caretaker mommy, he had been unable to sit for the rest of the day because of the spanking that followed. Not to mention the other punishments. The nice couple would now surely send him away. Tears began to flow and he started to tremble. His panic attack was interrupted by a tight hug by Yuko. Completely startled, his mind went blank. "Everything is all right, Naruto. Calm down." After a few moments in the embrace, the panic began to subside. Feeling the boy relax, Yuko loosened the embrace somewhat. Finally Naruto found his voice. "You're not mad?" The woman loosened the embrace and looked at Naruto startled. "Why would I be mad? In fact, I would be honored if you call me mommy." Naruto was shocked to the core. Someone actually wanted him? He had heard of adoption, even seen a few instances at the orphanage, but the few times he brought it up the caretakers only sneered at him. They said that nobody would ever want a brat like him. A new possibility entered his mind. He had witnessed one special event in the orphanage when the father of one girl showed up who had been presumed dead for months. It had been a very happy occasion as far as he could see before he was shooed away. "Are you my mommy?" Yuko looked at him with incomprehension for a moment before she understood. "You mean to ask if I'm the woman that gave originally birth to you?" Seeing Naruto's nod, she shook her head. "No, your original parents have been dead for years. Does that change anything for you?" she asked with an apprehensive expression. Naruto thought for only a moment. His original parents were dead, that was not unexpected. They had left him long ago. That there was someone who actually wanted him, however, was surprising. He would not throw that away. Now it was his turn to embrace the woman, no, his mother before him. Tears began to flow, but this time they were tears of joy. "You're my mommy now and forever. Thank you, son." The following embrace was interrupted when the third person present cleared his throat. Naruto and Yuko looked up at Daiki, who sported an expectant expression. Naruto had to think for a moment before he recognized what the problem was. Sometimes he really was an idiot. "Want to join us, Daddy?" Daiki's face lit up with the brightest smile he had ever seen. The man left his seat and joined them in a group hug. Naruto became almost giddy with the emotions that bubbled inside him and that he felt from his new parents. This was the happiest day in his life. He had finally found a family. Naruto's face was crunched up in an expression of utmost concentration as he went on with his latest task, building the highest possible tower out of wooden blocks. He was currently out of free blocks and tried to remedy the situation by removing some of the already used blocks to add them on the top. The difficult part was doing that without the tower crashing down, which had already happened today. Several times, his tiny hand hovered undecided over a block near the base of the tower. If he removed that one, then cuddle attack. Naruto squealed in surprise when he was unexpectedly picked up from behind and squeezed hard. The squeal soon turned to laughter as he identified his assailant. "Daddy, you're back." Yuko joined them in a three-way embrace and began to kiss Daiki passionately. Naruto didn't mind as long as he got his share of hugs. Kisses he could do without. In the time he had been with his new family, he had learned a lot about different displays of affections. His mother was a very physical person, freely giving out embraces, caresses and kisses. Father was more reserved, but often carried him around on his shoulders. Naruto loved the high vantage point it gave him. The world seemed so much larger than from his usual earth-bound perspective. His father had left several days ago to go for an extended hunting trip. Naruto had wanted to come along, but wasn't allowed to leave the area around the cottage. He had already explored the fringes of the forest, at first with Yuko in tow. They had collected a lot of berries and other edible plants. Naruto had never known where food came from and how much was readily available. At the present time he was allowed to wander around on his own as long as he stayed in eyeshot of the house and didn't enter any area he was expressly forbidden from entering without company, like the storehouse or the workshop. Mother's voice interrupted Naruto's musings. "How was your hunting, dear?" "Not as good as I would have liked. The deer were hard to find. It took me a lot of time to track them down, but I managed to bag a capital stag in the end not even an hour from here. The carcass is outside. I had to cut it up soon." Naruto inserted himself in the conversation. "Can I watch?" "If you want. The work is rather unappetizing though, so I don't know if your stomach can take it." "Sure I can." The dead animal was huge. In fact, it was so huge Naruto wondered how his father had managed to carry the thing back to the cottage. He must be far stronger than he looks, Naruto thought. The work was indeed bloody, and the smell did cause Naruto to feel somewhat nauseated from time to time, but he persevered. Step by step the animal was freed from its innards, a good deal of its blood and its hide. During the entire process Daiki lectured him about the possible uses of the animal part he was currently working on, the necessary techniques to process it and what things one should avoid doing. Most of it went beyond Naruto's understanding, but it was interesting nonetheless. Finally his father hung the carcass in an unused storeroom to cure the flesh for a few days. After a thorough scrubbing in the creek they returned inside the house. Naruto listened with rapt attention when Daiki regaled them with a tale of his hunting exploits over their evening meal. From time to time Yuko would add a tidbit or two. Apparently she liked to hunt as much as his father, but stayed at home because of Naruto. To his disappointment he was considered too young by both his parents to either accompany them on a hunt or stay alone for a longer time. According to his father it would be some time before he was ready. Later in the night when Naruto was half asleep in his bed the animals from his father's tales still paraded around in his head. The contest of skill between hunter and hunted fascinated him. Someday he too would be a great hunter. Months had passed, and Naruto couldn't be happier. He had a loving family and was learning tons of interesting stuff like what plants and animals were edible and which were not, how to survive for a time if he found himself alone in the woods and even basic cooking and household skills. Although he wasn't absolutely sure, he thought that his memory and learning capability was much better than before. On the other hand nobody had taken the time to teach him anything in the past, so how should he know what his normal rate of learning was? Either way, his vocabulary and ability to form longer and more complicated sentences had improved dramatically. Furthermore, it was easier to grasp more complex concepts, and his thoughts seemed somehow clearer. His parents had finally taken him along on a trip into the deep woods. Yuko had donned leather clothing similar to his father's for the journey. It was odd to see his mother without her customary dress, but it was infinitely more practical wear for the forest where twigs and branches could easily get entangled and lose clothing. When Naruto couldn't keep up on his short legs, his parent took turns in carrying him. During their journey they pointed out interesting plant or animals. Look over there, this moss is good to staunch the flow of blood from scrapes and wounds. The bark of that tree can be used to brew a tea that eases headaches. These tracks were made by a pack of wolves. It's normally better to avoid them, but these are already over a week old. At midday they made a break on a beautiful clearing. It was surrounded by large old trees and filled with lots and lots of colorful flowers. He had a vague feeling of familiarity, but nothing definite came to mind. When they sat down to eat their provisions they observed several rabbits playing in the grass. Naruto tried to catch some of them, but the animals were far better runners than him. Soon enough they were on the way again. The trip was more exhausting than Naruto had believed, but they reached their destination when the sun neared the horizon. Before them stretched a large lake with the other side barely visible. They made camp in a small natural cave in a hillside overlooking the lake. Naturally, the entire process of settling in was accompanied by lessons. If you make camp mind bodies of water, choose the place carefully. They can often swell unexpectedly, even if that applies more to rivers than lakes. Take the high ground, and make sure you have a free way to escape should the waters rise. They ate some fish that Yuko had caught and went to sleep. Cuddled between the bodies of his parents, Naruto felt warm and safe. On the next morning a new adventure for Naruto began. He was taught swimming, though it was more in the line of staying afloat than regular swimming. The unusual part, even in comparison with the last months, was the amount of direct skin-to-skin contact the splashing around involved. His parents had brought only one set of clothing, and they didn't want for it to get wet. It led to a series of questions about their bodies, but they were answered effortlessly. The question about clothing in general was far trickier. Clothing is useful for protection against the elements and changing one's appearance, but it's often more a question of social customs and not necessity what and how much one has to wear. There are certainly a lot of situations where different kinds of clothing are appropriate. We are completely alone here, so why should we hide our bodies if we don't have to? Animals most certainly don't do it, and the human body is nothing fundamentally different. Never be ashamed of your body, but take what the people around you consider appropriate into consideration. After they finished playing in the water and let the sun dry them, his parents got to work. They took turns in catching fish and gutting them. Naruto helped by hanging the gutted fish on an improvised frame to dry them in the sun. In the evening they sat on the edge of the lake and watched the sunset. The family stayed at the lake for several days until his parents judged that they had caught enough fish for the foreseeable future. Heavily loaded they returned home, and Naruto got to know a variety of different fish dishes in addition to his usual diet of game and plants. Naruto, we have to talk to you about something. He looked up from his current occupation, fighting a battle between the miniatures of different woodland creatures of which he had a veritable army by this time, with a questioning gaze. His father was sitting on the floor besides him, while his mother was standing on the other side of him. The most important thing first. Regardless of what will happen next, we will always love you. The truth is, we aren't human, we are something very different. Naruto was shocked. What do you mean you aren't human? You look normal. It's easier to show you. Watch. His father's entire form seemed to ripple before it was replaced by a large fox sporting black fur with silvery reflexes. It sat on his haunches and calmly watched Naruto with eyes the same color like his father's, even if these were slitted. Daddy? The fox nodded. Naruto carefully stretched his arm and scratched the head of the fox. He turned around and saw his mother replaced by an equally large fox with red gold fur that was slowly approaching him. Mommy? In answer to his question, Naruto got his face full of a long wet tongue. It tickled so much he couldn't suppress a giggle. Taking that as incentive, his father began licking his face too, what in turn increased Naruto's laughter. It soon evolved into a wrestling match between one boy and two foxes. After Naruto had tired himself sufficiently out, the three were lying before the fireplace. Yuko was dozing and used as a pillow by Naruto. His father was lying across from him and watching him attentively. To his surprise, the silvery fox began speaking. You're surprisingly calm, son. Doesn't it bother you that we aren't human? Don't care. You're my mommy and daddy. Your shape doesn't matter. But how do you do it? Magic. Magic? What is magic? Magic is the power to shape reality. The humans of your world can't use it, but we have a rather large amount. It is part of what we are. I might teach it to you sometime in the future. There is a lot more to it, and to us, but we will reveal it to you when you're ready. Oh, okay. He gave a large yawn. I'm tired. Good night. In the following time his parents spent more time in their fox forms around him. It was odd at first, but soon it made no difference to him. They were foxes mostly when they did something outdoors for which it was more practical, but doing work in the household would have been difficult without hands. The most fun he had when they let him ride on their backs in fox form and took him out to the fields. The wind in his face, the landscape slipping away, it all served to create a feeling of freedom he had never known before. Naruto would have wished for this happy state of affairs to continue indefinitely, but it was not to be. One day Yuko asked him to join them for an important conversation. Naruto followed her into the house to the table with a feeling of dread. He knew very well the one thing his parents had always avoided speaking of. His father opened the conversation with a serious expression. Naruto, you have to go back soon. Naruto immediately began to tear up. No, I don't want to leave you. Son, it is not that we want you to leave, but there are reasons why you have to. Very important reasons, Daiki said with a sigh. Why are you sending me away? Naruto asked. It's complicated. You have been with us for a long time. Did you notice that in the entire time you didn't grow even the tiniest bit? Today you look exactly like you did when you woke the first time in our home. Yuko said. Naruto's face scrunched up in thought. It was indeed true, but at the same time it couldn't be right. One didn't simply stop growing for no reason. Upon seeing Naruto's realization, Yuko continued with her explanation. I don't know how much you will understand from my explanation, but I will try. You already know that I and my maid aren't human. The fact is this entire world is not real. Your body is not really here, it just seems that way. Since the orphanage incident your real body has been in the Konoha hospital, but your mind has been here. This is all a dream? Naruto asked with trepidation. No, Daiki and I are real, even if the world around us is not. You were gravely injured, and we created it for you to recover. This world lies on the edge of dreams. We can control it to a large degree, but it is a prison for us at the same time. If you stay here too long, your body will become sick and die. Your mind will follow, because it can't exist without a body. We won't be parted for long though. After a few days you will be able to visit us again, but it won't be for as long as now. Do you understand? In fact, Naruto did understand. He was injured, they created a dream world to protect him, but he couldn't stay here forever. They weren't sending him away, it was just a temporal absence. How long have I been here? He asked. Time flows differently here and in the waking world. You have spent more than a year with us, but on the outside only a few weeks have passed. In the future virtually no time will pass when you visit us, but the visits will have to be much shorter. People would become suspicious if your body becomes regularly comatose, and I don't think you want to leave the other children in the orphanage alone with your body when you can't fight back, his father explained. At that Naruto had to suppress a shudder. He remembered only too well the cruelty of the other children. There is one more thing, and it is important. Tell no one, and I mean absolutely no one, about us or what happened to you. If they hear about us they will try to prevent you from meeting us ever again. Simply say you don't remember what happened since the woman fetched you from her room. Your father made it so that nobody will be able to tell that you didn't tell them the truth. The old man you know from the orphanage will probably visit you. We don't trust him. Act like you always have towards him. Arouse no suspicion. Yuko instructed him. Just bear with it for 7 days, son. That is the earliest possible time you can visit us again. You will feel a darkness trying to pull you down. Don't resist it, it is our way of transporting your mind here. Sleep was evading Naruto for a long time that night. Yuko held him close the entire time and Daiki told stories. Finally, his eyes closed and he fell asleep. Slowly the world swam into focus. He was lying in a relative comfortable bed that was a far cry from his little cot in the orphanage and was staring at a white ceiling. The room he was in was otherwise empty besides a chair and a locker. It looked pretty much like a standard hospital room he had seen when he had broken his arm when he was 2 years old. Naruto tried to sort his memories. The long time spent with his new parents was clearly there, but the events from the orphanage were equally fresh in his mind. Hello? Is anyone here? 2 men with painted face masks seemed to appear from thin air. Naruto had seen them occasionally when the old man visited the orphanage. The larger man turned towards the other and said in a commanding voice, Newt, Go and notify the Hokage immediately that Uzumaki-san is awake. Quote. The man with the newt mask nodded and hurriedly left the room through the door. The other man made no move to answer Naruto, so the boy asked again. Why am I here? What happened? Your questions will be answered in time. You were brought to the hospital after you were injured. Now please wait for Hokage-sama to arrive. It wasn't long before the robe-clad old man and an unknown but very old woman arrived. He knew the old man from before. He was the only one that visited him occasionally and was nice to him, but he was also the one his parents had warned him against. Hello Naruto. How do you feel? Hello old man. I'm fine. What happened? Why am I here? Naruto asked. The old man shared a look with the woman before answering. You have been very ill for a long time. Yamanaka Dono here is a special doctor. She will examine you, all right? Sure, old man. After shifting the chair to his bedside, the old woman sat down. Hello Naruto, my name is Izumi Yamanaka. What is the last thing you remember? Remembering the words of his parents, Naruto made a thoughtful face. I think I was going to sleep. It was a pretty normal day. I ate some gruel that evening. He looked at the woman. That's all. Again the old lady and the old man shared a look before she turned back to face him. I will have to examine you. It might feel a little weird for a moment. The old lady leaned close to him and made some rapid signs with her hands before touching his forehead. Naruto felt a very strange sensation. It was as if his mind had split in two. The real him was buried under another him that was slightly different. He could feel something touch the false him and poke around. After a while the sensation ended, and he couldn't feel the second mind anymore. Thank you, child. I have to talk with Hokage-sama for a few minutes, we will be right back. They left the room for a few minutes, but Naruto could still hear some parts of the conversation. He twiddled his thumbs while pretending he didn't hear anything. Seems completely recovered, tells the truth, found no memory of the attack. Sure, can we send him able to leave the hospital today, shouldn't cause problems. Soon enough, the old man re-entered the room. It seems the doctor says you are completely healthy. You should be able to return to your home today. Aren't you glad to meet your friends again? Naruto got a pleading look in his eyes. Please don't send me back there. All the people there are mean to me. Now, Naruto, I'm sure it can't be that bad. I'm sorry, but you can't stay here, and there is no other place for you to go. I'll take you back later today. True to his word, the Hokage walked him back to the orphanage himself after some other doctors had checked him over. After a short conversation with the new matron he was sent to his old room. The next few days in the orphanage were some of the worst of his short life. The staff was cold to him as ever, if a tad more hostile than before. They didn't know anything specific, but everyone connected him with the death of the well-liked orphanage matron. The other children picked up on this and increased their own bullying when they weren't ignoring him. But the worst thing was the transition from a warm, loving environment to this cold hell. Before he had longed for a family, even if he didn't exactly knew what it was about. Now that he had experienced it, his bleak life in the orphanage was 100 times worse. Each night he silently cried himself to sleep. Just a few more days until I can go back, he thought. Another thing was different though, he had already lived considerably longer than the age of his body led everyone to believe. Even if it wasn't the normal growth process children went through because of the lack of physical development, Naruto understood far more what was happening around him than before. He noticed the whispers and hateful glares from the adults as well as their incitement of the bullies to make him a target. Even if he still didn't know why they hated him, he could now tell that it was not because of any actions he had taken. He would have to ask his parents about that. Finally, on the 7th night when he once again laid awake he felt a comforting darkness wrap around his mind and pull him to another location. Naruto gladly gave in to the pull. He remembered his father's words to expect something like it. The next time he woke up he was again lying in his bed in the cottage, with his parents waiting at the bedside. The time after Naruto woke from his coma was an alternation of contrasts that couldn't be more different. A week in the orphanage was followed by approximately 10 days with his parents in a steady rotation. In the waking world practically nothing interesting happened. Naruto was generally isolated and bullied by the other children and treated with scorn and neglect that fell just short of outright abuse by the caretakers, but there was simply nothing to do for him other than live one uncomfortable day after another. It was impossible for him to leave the orphanage and do something productive. He would have loved nothing better than to shut it completely out, but his parents wouldn't let him. They forced him to retell each week to them in excruciating detail and prevented him from suppressing his memories. After some prodding by his parents, he also paid more attention to the events around him. Yuko and Daiki wanted to know what happened in the world, and he would try his best. Eavesdropping was surprisingly easy as almost everybody would ignore him provided he kept somewhat out of sight. Additionally, his hearing was more sensitive than before and kept slowly getting better. Most of what he overheard was either completely mundane gossip or went completely over his head, but he reported it faithfully as detailed as he could remember. He managed to find 2 nuggets that interested his parents. Apparently during his time in the hospital, some foreign shinobi had tried to abduct the young Hyuga heiress and had been killed in the attempt. They had needed to execute and deliver the body of the Hyuga who did the deed to avert a war. The other piece of news his parents found interesting was that certain trade goods were becoming increasingly rare. Naruto didn't really understood the significance of all this, but what made his parents happy made him happy too. In the world of his parents, things went much better. Loved and cared for, Naruto's time was spent with playing and learning things. He was a very inquisitive child, and his parents were only too pleased to provide him with answers. His education progressed to just short of the point where his body couldn't keep up with his mind. It was extraordinarily annoying to know all sorts of things but unable to do them, even if his body control was much better than a normal child of his apparent age. Months passed and life was generally good, or bad, depending on his location. Then he thought to ask his parents a question after a particular fun afternoon spent playing tag and hide and seek in the meadows with his parents in fox form. What's it like to be a fox? Well, it's hard to describe. You have really great hearing and a good sense of smell and some other stuff. Explanations don't really do it justice, you have to experience it. Can I be a fox too? His parents exchanged a glance before Yuko spoke. If you want to, we can turn you into one for a time, little one. You can't do it yourself. You'd need to learn to use magic before that. Sure, I want to. Well then, hold still for a moment. Daiki's tail grew in size until it was large enough to completely wrap around Naruto, who closed his eyes to prevent any hair getting into them. The change itself felt really strange, like his body was liquefying and flowing into a new form, but it was over almost immediately after it started. When he opened his eyes, his perspective was much closer to the ground than before. His vision hardly changed, but his senses of smell and hearing were increased enormously. He could detect a lot of scents and noises he hadn't noticed a moment before. After taking a few careful steps to test his new 4-legged form, Naruto was surprised how easy it was, almost as if he already knew how to move. Soon the game of tag was resumed. This transformation opened a whole new world for Naruto. His fox form was physically much more mature than his human body, and he was soon allowed into the nearby areas on his own. Instinct told him what to do, even if he could consciously disregard it. His first attempts at hunting were humiliating failures, but he soon figured out how to locate prey from the sounds it made and to judge the correct distance for a jumping attack. The first time he managed to catch a mouse on his own was immensely satisfying. Eating raw meat and insects was a bit icky at first, but he became accustomed to it after a while. From that point on, he spent a good deal of time as a fox. It also gave his parents something new to teach until his real body's development had caught up some more with his mental age. This wasn't the only question with far-reaching consequences he asked. I'm always bored. Can't you teach me anything I can do in the orphanage? It had been more than a month since Naruto began spending time as a fox, and he still enjoyed it greatly. No, the problem was the waking world. The orphanage was just so boring. Eavesdropping on conversations and learning to be sneakier could only hold his attention for so long, and his breaking point was reached. There was only so much he could do if nobody wanted to talk or play with him, and he had become good enough at eavesdropping that it left him with a lot of free time on his hands. Yuko looked at him thoughtfully for a moment and answered his question with a counter-question. I think I have something for you, Kit. Do you know what chakra is? Naruto shook his head. Since he began spending time as a fox himself, his mother had taken to calling him Kit. He supposed it was better than little one. He wasn't that little anymore. It's the energy shinobi used to get stronger, control the elements and do other things. She explained, but in truth it is everywhere. Every living being produces chakra, and different forms can even be found in the non-living environment. It's a very powerful force that is composed of the energies of mind and body. Shinobi are the protectors of the village, aren't they? The old man often talks about them and the respect they get and how the village treats them as heroes, and how the Hokage has the most respect of all. That's a lot of half-truths. Half-truths? Statements that are true, but important parts to get the correct picture are missing. What the Hokage said is not false, but misleading. It seems he wants to steer you in a particular direction. Play along, but never trust the man. Shinobi do indeed protect the village, but they do a lot other things, with some of them quite despicable. You don't get respect if you become Hokage, you need to already have it to get that position. Why anyone would want it I don't know, but let us return to the matter of chakra. Yuko held out her arm, and a red energy streaked with gold became visible around it. When she gestured in the direction of a loose stick at the other side of the clearing, a tendril of the energy shot out, picked up the piece of wood and retreated back into her arm while depositing the stick into her hand. The stick held before her face, she breathed softly on it. Only instead of air a small stream of fire emerged from her mouth, setting the stick ablaze. She showed it to Naruto before dousing the fire with a small stream of water. Chakra can do a lot of things, but you need a lot of training to use it correctly. Only a fraction of all the humans in the world is even capable of utilizing it to any meaningful degree, and most of them become shinobi. Can you teach me to become a shinobi, mommy? His mother shook her head. Sorry kid, but neither your father nor I know the details of shinobi training. We use chakra in an entirely different manner, but that is impossible to teach. You will probably learn that in a few years by visiting the Shinobi Academy. Seeing Naruto's dejected look, she added, but we should be able to develop some exercises for you to do in the meantime that will give you an edge later. I'll have to talk with your father about it first, though. Thanks mommy. 2 weeks later, Naruto was awaiting his first practical lesson about chakra. The time before had been spent with explanations and theory about the ethereal chakra system that permeated his body, the nodes from which chakra could be released into the external environment and what could be done with the chakra internally. He was sitting across from his parents in a clearing in the woods. Close your eyes and concentrate, kid. I will send some of my own chakra into you to help you draw on yours. Ready? Upon seeing Naruto's nod, a thin tendril of golden energy emerged from Yuko's outstretched hand and made contact with Naruto's torso. At first nothing happened aside from a warm, comfortable feeling. Then Naruto felt it. It was a slight tug somewhere inside of him that he couldn't quite locate. After a few minutes the exercise ended. Did you manage to feel your chakra? Yeah, I felt it, but couldn't quite get a hold. Naruto answered. That's no problem. You're very young to learn using your chakra, and we have a lot of time. Over the next weeks, Naruto finally managed to learn some rudimentary control of his chakra. The exercises his parents had him do grew slowly more complex with time. At first he had simply to concentrate chakra in different areas of his body. His control of the internal chakra flow grew steadily better until he could even feel the individual major pathways. To his frustration, he couldn't do any external chakra exercises in the real world for fear of being detected. Concentrate some of your chakra into a little ball in your body. Add more to it until you can feel it straining against the pathway. Just enough to be noticeable. If it grows uncomfortable, immediately dissolve the ball. Now move the ball slowly around. Yuko instructed. Add more balls when you are confident that you can control them simultaneously. If you do that long enough, your chakra capacity and control will grow enormously. You can also train the speed of forming and dissolving the balls. It should be possible to do that in the orphanage without anyone noticing as long as you don't expel the chakra. Yes, mommy. At first it was difficult to follow his mother's directions, but it soon got easier. It helped enormously that both his parents could sense exactly what he was doing with the chakra in his body. There were a lot of times in the orphanage when he simply had nothing better to do, and he used the time to train faithfully. It was better than staring at a wall. Naruto had just celebrated his 4th birthday with his parents when he thought to ask a question that had bothered him for quite some time. Why does everyone hate me? I already asked the old man, but he said he didn't know. Yuko and Daiki looked at each other before his mother let out a heavy sigh. I suppose it was only a matter of time for you to ask that question. It's partly because of me. That confused the boy greatly. I don't understand. You're so nice, and how do they even know of you? Not to everyone, and certainly not before I met your father. Have you ever heard of the Yondaime Hokage? Yuko asked. Naruto nodded. Yeah, the old man and the caretakers talk about him sometimes. They say he is a hero. One of the faces on the mountain belongs to him. He died after killing the giant demon fox Kyuubi. The Kyuubi wasn't killed, Kit. Nothing a human can do can permanently destroy a tailed beast, of which the Kyuubi was the most powerful. No, it was merely sealed. What do you mean by sealed? Naruto asked curiously. Seals are a very advanced skill of shinobi. It's hard to explain, but they paint specific patterns onto an object and charge it with chakra. The most common applications are exploding tags, little strips of paper that can release their stored chakra in an explosion, and storage seals. They create an extra-dimensional pocket to store things. Daiki explained. Extra dimenso what? Let me show you. I'll be right back. Daiki left for a short time to retrieve a square bit of fabric from the storeroom. He showed it to Naruto. See, it's a completely normal piece of cloth. Now watch this. The man fixed the fabric lying flat on the table with a stare while obviously concentrating. At first nothing happened, but then the surface of the fabric bulged downward. It seemed that the fabric now covered the bottom of a hole that was much deeper than the table was thick. It grew steadily deeper until Daiki relaxed his concentration. You can touch it now, son. Naruto didn't need further invitation. The hole was really deep. If he stuck his arm into it he could barely reach the bottom. When he moved the fabric he saw that the table was completely intact. He looked up to his parents. That's strange. Daiki chuckled. That it is. But there are a few more things you have to see. With these words he picked the fabric up and spun it slowly around in his hands. One side had the hole, the other was completely straight. With the hole on the underside he put it on one of the cups of the table. The cup disappeared into the fabric without making any bulge on the upper side of the fabric. He turned the piece of cloth around, thereby showing that the cup was inside the pocket. You see, this pocket doesn't really exist in the usual dimensions of length, width and height. It reaches into an extra direction. Storage seals do something different to create a similar effect. On the outside they have only the size of a scroll, but on the inside they can be much larger. They are used to comfortably transport items that are too big, or if there are too many of them. Back to the Yondaime Hokage, he was an expert in the sealing arts, and used that to imprison the Kyuubi. Like a storage scroll, but vastly more complicated. Now, the more powerful of the tailed beasts can't be contained by any random object, at least not for long. They had to be sealed into a human. Furthermore, the shinobi villages began long ago to covet the power of the demons. The seals are not only meant to imprison, they enable the host to draw on the sealed beast's power. Humans marked in that way are called demon containers or jinchuriki. Naruto hung on his parents' every word, but slowly a feeling of dread began to spread through him. Yuko had obviously difficulties to continue, until Daki gave his wife's hand a reassuring squeeze. Naruto, you are such a demon container. The containers are usually feared and despised by other humans. Doubly so in your case because of the causalities caused by the Kyuubi's attack. Naruto was stunned. It all fit together, the glares, the unjust punishments. But his mother had said that she was partly at fault. He came to the logical conclusion and asked, "Are you, the Kyuubi?" "I once was, but I'm different now. You can thank your father for that. He came to me and offered to change me. If it had been otherwise, it would have been impossible to meet you until many years in the future, and I fear it would not have been pleasant. I wasn't the friendliest being around." Thoughts swirled chaotically in Naruto's mind, the most prominent among them, Mommy is the Kyuubi. Even at his young age Naruto knew of the Kyuubi attack, not the least because it coincided with his birthday. The beast had caused severe losses among shinobi and civilians alike before the Yondaime defeated it. Defeated it by sealing it into him. It took the boy quite some time to come to grips with that revelation. "Why did you attack Konoha?" "I wasn't doing that of my own free will. At the time of the attack somebody else was controlling me, but to tell the truth, I may have tried to destroy Konoha anyway. In my defense, I feel that I have a legitimate grudge against the village. You weren't my first container, there have been 2 before you. Konoha has kept me imprisoned for more than half a century, most of the time in quite some pain, thereby earning my eternal hatred. Anyway, As soon as I regained control on that day, I was already in heavy combat with the shinobi forces of the village and simply continued fighting until the Yondaime removed me from the immediate vicinity of the village and used his sealing technique. Why did he choose me? He had his reasons, mostly bad ones we think. Tears that had threatened to fall now spilled from Yuko's eyes. Sorry, I need some time alone, she said before rushing out of the house. Naruto was reeling from these revelations, but there still remained questions to be asked. Did you know my original parents? How did they die? Daiki shook his head. I know of them, but never met them when they were alive. When I arrived in this world they were long dead. Yuko did meet them, but bears them quite a lot of enmity. I must confess I too don't have a high opinion of them, not the last because of crimes they committed against you and Yuko. The old man knows them too, even if he claims ignorance. They died for what they believed right, but I disagree. Your father might have lived if he had acted differently than he did, while your mother was already doomed before the attack got underway. Who were they? And what crimes? Sorry son, but I don't think you're ready for this knowledge. The matter is complicated, and I don't want to tell you everything until you are old enough to understand it completely. You should be able to decide on your own if you can forgive them, not simply adopt our perhaps biased view. Can you accept that? Naruto was thinking hard. Daiki and Yuko were always nice to him. Without them, he would be completely alone. The old man didn't count, he saw him perhaps 1 or 2 times a month, and he was lying about his original parents. So what if his mother was a monster? She was certainly nicer to him than the villagers. It wasn't that she asked to be sealed into him. He couldn't really fathom how long a decade was, but he too would be furious if he was imprisoned for such a long time. The days when he was confined to his tiny room in the orphanage were bad enough. It was only for a few years he was forced to live in there, and he certainly hated it with a passion. Memories of the long time with his foster parents came to the forefront of his mind. They had always acted in his best interest and loved him. Naruto gave that love right back. In short, he trusted Yuko and Daiki. If they thought he wasn't ready for something, he believed them. Yes, Daddy, I'll wait until you think me ready. Daiki smiled. Thank you, son. You should talk with your mother. She feared you would hate her for her part in your mistreatment. Naruto immediately headed out to follow Yuko. He could never hate her. After he had assured her that all was well, they went back inside. One additional question came to Naruto and he turned to his father. If mommy was the Kyuubi, what about you? You said earlier that you arrived in this world sometime after the Kyuubi attack. His father answered slowly, choosing each word with care. That's right. I did not originally belong to this world. I came from outside. My form was different from now, and I was in dire need of help. Yuko provided that help, but it changed us both. Now we are the same and bonded for eternity. Does that answer your question? I guess. Daiki recognized that Naruto didn't sound very convinced. Don't worry, when you're older I'll tell you more. Nothing will ever change the fact that we love you. Months came and went, and Naruto grew more adventurous. He explored more and more of the land of his parents as far as he could travel in the limited time he was with them, and saw sights like none he had seen in the waking world. The woods seemed to have no end to them, but the other direction proved more fruitful. The meadows changed to sparsely vegetated grassy plains after about 20 kilometers and stretched far beyond the horizon. Enormous gray mountains rose from the ground, their peaks shrouded in clouds or covered in eternal snow. Even further away was an ocean. Naruto had been speechless the first time he saw it. It was an endless expanse of nothing but water. At the beginning of one of his visits things change. His father wasn't present when he woke up. Where's Daddy? I'm not sure, kid. He said he was preparing a surprise, and we should come meet him at the seashore as soon as you arrived. But that's almost a week of travel. Ho ho ho, you underestimate your mother. You don't believe I can only turn into a tiny fox, do you? With these words, his mother transformed into a fox, but it was not her normal-sized form. Instead, she stood at a shoulder height of more than 2 meters, with 9 long furry tails swishing through the air behind her. Hop on board, kid. I'll show you true speed. One of the tails wrapped around Naruto and deposited him on Yuko's back. As soon as she had verified that Naruto had a good hold, she started running. Naruto had always loved riding on his parents' backs, but this was an entirely new level. The trees were literally flying past and the wind threatened to pull him from his mother's back. He clutched her fur as tightly as he could while whooping loudly. They needed barely an hour to reach the mountain range where they made a short break. As they continued in the direction of the ocean, they came upon a wondrous sight. Large blocks of stone were carving themselves out of the mountainside, taking to the air and floating in a steady procession into the distance. Well, it seems your father is pulling out all the stops. What you see is a mighty display of magic. Somehow, his mother sounded annoyed. Naruto only stared in wonder at the impressive sight. The blocks were gigantic, and they were floating in the same direction they were going. Following the trail, Yuko and Naruto came upon the ocean. The land ended in steep cliffs more than 100 meters above the water, but the blocks of stone continued moving quite a distance onto the open sea before forming a colossal vortex. In the middle of the vortex, Daiki stood on a piece of hovering rock, conducting the chaotic dance around him. With a swish of his arm, hundreds of blocks were directed to their locations. At first it seemed as if they were simply plunging into the ocean, but soon enough the foundations of whatever he was building rose from the raging sea. Stone piled on stone, and the structure grew. Towers and walls took shape and formed a large castle above the waves. Windows and doorways appeared in the massive stone. At last a bridge emerged from the stones under the main entrance and elongated until it touched the ground immediately before Yuko's front paws. When the doors opened, Yuko took the obvious invitation and crossed the bridge while Naruto was still staring impressed at the castle. From some of his parents' talk and stories he had gathered that magic was powerful, but this? Wow, simply wow. After entering the castle they passed through a long corridor with colorful tapestries. Most showed only abstract symbols, but some displayed figures doing obviously magic stuff like conjuring creatures or controlling the weather. Finally they reached a grand hall decorated with strange devices where Daiki awaited them. In contrast to his normal attire, he was clad in flowing blue and gray robes. "Welcome you two. I assume you got a good view of the creation of the castle?" "Hi Daddy, I saw everything. That was great," Naruto shouted before he dismounted and ran to his father to hug him. "Hello dear. I concur that it was impressive, but I would like an explanation what this is all about," Yuko said, gesturing with some of her tails to the surrounding castle. "Well, you remember that we decided that Naruto was ready to learn more about magic? I thought his lessons needed a more sophisticated environment and the right atmosphere. A castle or tower is just the thing for that. The site was spectacular, was it not?" "It certainly was, but I would prefer to be informed beforehand if you planned something like this," Yuko said in a dangerous tone. His father was apparently oblivious to his mother's bad mood. But then it wouldn't have been a surprise. "Now come along, I'll show you something even more impressive." When he turned around while Yuko grumbled in the background, he winked to Naruto, indicating that he was aware of Yuko's mood but simply found it funny to tease her. After some wandering through different hall and stairways, Daiki led them to a balcony overlooking the ocean. A stiff breeze was blowing, but with a wave of his father's hand the wind subsided. He struck a lecturing pose. "I will begin with a general lesson. We told you that this world wasn't completely real, but I don't think you really understand how much that means. I control this world completely. The building of this little castle, while certainly impressive, is nothing in comparison. Now watch while I use my phenomenal cosmic powers to change the landscape to my every whim." Outwardly, his father wasn't doing anything, but something changed. The ocean wasn't blue anymore. In fact, it wasn't even an ocean anymore. Where moments before waves had crashed against the shore, an endless expanse of yellow sand stretched to the horizon. Seconds later, grass began to grow and trees sprouted until lightly wooded grasslands took the place of the desert, only to be replaced by a swamp. Spires of rock rose from the ground, only to crumble and form an expanse of rolling hills. Then the sky began to change color. After it had cycled through all 7 colors of the rainbow, the sky shifted to black while the sunlight faded. Stars of all colors appeared and formed figures that began to reenact the stories that his parents had told him on so many evenings. Naruto spied the master wizard who was betrayed by his apprentice and killed in a shape-shifting duel, the dragon who was slain by thieves that coveted his treasure, and many more. All too soon, in his opinion, the show ended. After everything had returned to its normal color as well as shape and the ocean was back, Daiki bowed. Naruto clapped his hands in applause. "Wow, that was so cool. Can I learn to do that too? Perhaps one day. You have to learn to walk before you run. Now for some simpler stuff we should better go indoors." A walk through the castle later, they entered a mid-sized room with some comfortable furniture and full of strange stuff like staffs, crystal balls and amulets. After they had taken their seats, or in Yuko's case lied down on a massive couch, Daiki proceeded with his lecture. Now I'll show you some tricks that are much easier and require far less power. They are examples what the magic of humans in other worlds looks like. I already told you that magic is the power to reshape reality, but the manner to access it can be very different and sometimes even ridiculous. His father then muttered something in a language Naruto didn't understand, and a lump of ore appeared on the formerly empty table. Following that, he took a piece of chalk to draw a circle with some symbols around the rock. When he pressed his palms on the table, the ore changed with a flash of light to a pile of gold coins. Daiki took a long staff into his hand and hummed 4 notes. Each note evoked a glint of colored light from the staff. When the last note faded away, the gold was surrounded by a blue and gold glimmering light, obscuring his vision. After it cleared, the gold had turned into straw. Naruto couldn't believe his ears at first when his father began to sing a quite childish song about basket weaving. His amusement faded when he noticed that the individual straw stalks began to dance and interweave in time with the music. After a short time, they had formed a perfect replica of a cup. Daiki stopped singing and now waved his hands around in exaggerated gestures, upon which the replica turned into a real porcelain cup. The cup morphed into a real live rat when his father tapped the cup with a short stick and said some words that Naruto didn't understand. Squealing, the rat tried to escape but was hit by a stream of sparkles, upon which it turned into a bunny. The bunny managed to almost reach the door before his father pointed a finger at it and a thin green beam shot out towards the fleeing animal. Only a fine trace of dust remained. Meanwhile, Naruto had stars in his eyes when he imagined doing the bunny trick to some of the meaner children in the orphanage. After he noticed that the show was over, he turned to his father. "That was great. You said this was an easier display. Does that mean I can learn that quickly?" "Certainly, if you invest enough effort. You won't be able to use it in the outside world though." Naruto's shoulders fell as his dream of the bunny revenge was shattered. The magic of each world is different, and we don't know the correct way to access it there. Beings like your mother and I produce our own magic in large quantities, meaning we could simply wish for something to happen, push a lot of power into it and reap the results, but things won't work the same way for you. For that little display of human magic, I had to change the underlying functioning of this world each time to accommodate for the different structure of magic. Surely you noticed how I didn't have to make silly gestures or use tools to make the changes outside happen. Depending on how things truly are in the outside world, you may have to use something similar to these tools. Yuko cut in. That leads to the next thing we want you to do. To learn what makes the world tick and precisely what the status of magic is. Your father can look out of your eyes for a short time when you visit us, but we need privacy for that. There might be some noticeable side effects. You'll have to convince the Hokage somehow to allow you to live on your own. It's a long-term project, so don't rush things. Sure, mommy. Yuko stood from her resting place and stretched before changing into human form. I say we return to the cottage for a while. I don't find this castle very comfortable. Daiki shrugged. If you want. It's mostly empty anyway. The three walked leisurely out of the castle before Yuko stopped them. It's getting late. I say we take the direct way home. Direct way? Naruto asked. Just come along, you'll see. They continued walking seemingly at the same pace for a few minutes, but suddenly Naruto noticed that they had already reached the mountainside that his father had used as quarry. Before he could understand how it was possible to traverse a distance that his mother had needed almost half an hour at a full run, for they were already walking on the plains. Naruto tried to pay careful attention to the surroundings, but again they were amidst the meadows without him noticing the change. Soon enough the familiar cottage came into sight. How did we get here so quickly? Normally it would take a week, and we were walking even slower than normal. Yuko simply answered, magic. Oh, come on. How did you do it? Well, we could tell you, but that would take all the fun out of it. I give you a hint. It's not really anything you do, but the right mindset. Furthermore, it will only work in this world because your father set it up. Figure it out yourself. It is a test how far you've come. Quote. His father objected to that. I don't think he will be ready for that for quite a while. Shelve that riddle for a while, son, and try again when you have more experience. You can't solve everything right away. No, we'll better start with a few basics. Even if the magic is different from world to world, there are a few principles that apply in most. In this manner Naruto's training in magic started, or at least the beginnings thereof. Mostly it consisted of meditating and facing strange things which were clearly not natural and were sometimes painful to look at. He also learned techniques to suppress and purge memories, keep his mind flexible and other mental exercises. His time was now split between general education, wilderness survival and hunting skills, chakra training, magic instruction and of course playtime. Even if the last one steadily decreased as he got older and could handle more and longer instruction. Naruto felt content and at peace for the first time in a long while. At least while he was in the waking world, at the edge of dreams he could get all the peace he wanted. No more hateful caretakers and bullies to contend with daily. It had taken far too long for his liking, but finally he had his own apartment. Normally no 5-year-old would be allowed to live on his own, but the Hokage had finally caved when Naruto had arranged for him to witness some of the frequent abuse he suffered at the hands of the other orphans and the caretakers. And by a whole lot of begging and pleading, he simply had convinced the old man to secretly observe him during dinner time. It had been really easy to arrange the abuse to be a bit more extreme than usual. He getting a smaller portion than everyone else and the other orphans trying to steal his food were quite normal. But he had chosen his seating position in the relative vicinity of one of the greater bullies of the orphanage on purpose. The idiot couldn't resist the temptation to get a few slaps and shoves in, but this time Naruto had caused it to escalate into a full-blown beating by refusing to give up his meal and some innocuous-sounding remarks that pushed all the buttons of the bully. After the caretakers broke up the scuffle, Naruto's assertions of innocence were ignored as usual and he was sent to his room without food. That continued for several meals and different bullies. Sometime later the Hokage had finally relented and took him from the orphanage. The old geezer probably expected Naruto to need help very soon and would use that to send him back, but he was determined to keep his newfound freedom. Naruto's 3-room apartment was not much to look at, but sufficient for his current needs. It had a combined cooking, living area, a bathroom and a bedroom. The building was located in one of the poorer areas of the village, and if Naruto was any judge it would soon lose a lot of tenants that wouldn't want to continue living in the same house as him. For now he was just lying on his bed and enjoying the silence and solitude. Relative solitude at last. There was still a hidden anbu sticking to the ceiling in his living room. The woman was quite well hidden and Naruto would have overlooked her if it was not for his sensitive nose and acute sense of hearing. While both were a far cry from what he had at his disposal as a fox, they were apparently much better than the human average. It had taken quite a while before he even realized that it wasn't a thing that normally came up in the limited conversations he had with the caretakers or other children. Additionally, he possessed an improved night vision which was quite useful even if he still needed some light to see. Whatever technique the anbu used to hide her presence, it didn't manage to completely suppress her smell and some small noises when she shifted her position. Naruto was content to let her stay without revealing he knew about her. Her presence was expected. He supposed it would be some months before the Hokage would withdraw his close anbu guard after he proved he could live on his own and no one tried to harm him. As soon as he was unobserved he could finally get some training in and explore the village and its surroundings. He really looked forward to wandering in the forest. His guard detail and the old man would notice that he was mature for his age, but hopefully write it off to his unpleasant upbringing. For now he was content to lay low and work on his internal chakra exercises. Only 3 days until I can see mommy and daddy again, he thought before going to sleep. The Anbu chipmunk invisibly followed her assigned charge as the boy made his way through the streets of Konoha. It had been a surprise to her that the child she had saved more than 2 years ago had been allowed his own apartment. In the normal run of events, orphans left the orphanage permanently only when they were adopted or reached the age of 7, when most began working in a job, or at least began their training. Some select few went to the academy to become shinobi. She had expected for the Jinchuriki to be enrolled as early as possible, but that was still some time off. Nowadays most children started the academy at 7 or more commonly at 8 years of age. Anyways, the Hokage had decided to remove Uzumaki from the orphanage and provided an apartment. Naturally he had assigned an around-the-clock Anbu guard to watch over the child and protect him from possible attacks. Chipmunk was one of the Anbu who had been saddled with the job, not that she was complaining. It was light duty and she could use a break. Her performance wasn't what it once was, and she knew her retirement was drawing near. A few too many life and death fights had left her with a constant ache in her joints that the medics couldn't quite cure. She planned to retire from ninja life entirely and move with her husband-to-be, who would likewise retire to the capital of Fire Country. There they would open a civilian business with the nest egg they had accumulated and start a family, occasionally providing Konoha with interesting tidbits of intelligence that came their way. None of them had any relations left, and they both had learned far too much about Konoha's dark secrets during their careers to want to stay in the village. Besides, she didn't want any of her children to become shinobi. That occupation had far too many hazards for her liking, and she wanted to die surrounded by a complete family of children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren in her old age. Back to her current assignment, the boy was surprisingly mature in how he went about his life. Uzumaki seemed aware of his surroundings, avoided dangerous situations and generally was much more advanced than expected. The reports from the orphanage had painted the picture of a notorious troublemaker, but Chipmunk and her colleagues were seeing none of this. Instead, the boy managed to competently take care of himself, even if the villagers gave him a lot of trouble. Most shops kicked him out, and unfortunately she couldn't do anything about it. The civilian council had managed years ago to pass a law that allowed shopkeepers the right to refuse doing business with any non-shinobi they didn't like. It wasn't even directed against Uzumaki, no, the law had been in effect much longer than the boy was alive. It was originally a measure intended to make life difficult for a particular group of new merchants that wanted to do their business in Konoha outside of the established trading protocols and families. As it didn't really affect the shinobi side, nobody had opposed it at the time, and it had practically seen no use since then. The few merchants that did business with Uzumaki generally charged outrageous rates and sold him only substandard wares, but as in the first case they were allowed to do that. Prices were a matter of haggling, after all. The Sandame was theoretically able to do something about the problem, but was apparently unwilling to spend the necessary political capital when it was required for other matters he deemed more important. Chipmunk was somewhat sympathetic to the boy, but was simply too emotionally jaded to do anything about it. Guarding him was her job, not parenting. And if she was honest with herself, she too wouldn't want a Jinchuriki around her if it wasn't absolutely unavoidable. In spite of those difficulties, the boy got on with his life. He collected some edible plants from Konoha's green areas to add to his diet and was perfectly capable to cook a meal out of them. That had come as no small surprise, and when the Sandame questioned the boy, he said simply that he had often snuck into the orphanage kitchens to grab something to eat when he was denied food and learned to cook by observation. Other than that, he had found a ramen stand whose owners were friendly to him, and after the Sandame visited the stand a few times, business lost because of Uzumaki's presence balanced with business gained because of the Hokage's patronage. If she was any judge, the Anbu detail would soon be reassigned. Uzumaki had shown in the last 3 months that he was perfectly capable of staying out of trouble, and the Anbu were needed elsewhere. There were always too few Anbu operatives to go around, and the 4 per day delegated to the guard duty posed a small but noticeable drain on ANBU's manpower. She would have to request retirement sooner than anticipated, as she didn't really feel up to returning to heavier duty. Naruto was cautiously optimistic when the Anbu guarding him left and wasn't replaced for several weeks. Their constant presence had irritated him to no end, but he couldn't even acknowledge their existence without revealing his increased senses. Now that they didn't watch his every step, he could act with much more freedom. He still wasn't able to enact one of the more compromising plans, as there was no telling when the old man would choose to spy on him with his crystal ball. It only happened at random intervals, but he noticed the forming chakra connection of the technique at least once per week. When he felt it at first in the orphanage, he hadn't known what it was, but a visit to the Hokage's office solved that puzzle. The old man had believed Naruto asleep and used his crystal ball to spy on some people. After that event, Naruto had connected the dots. The spying of the Hokage was annoying, especially because he didn't know if the man had truly his best interests at heart or if it was all an act. Heck, the old man could even genuinely care for him but still make decisions that ended up hurting him, either knowingly for the greater good of Konoha, or unknowingly because he wasn't completely aware of all the problems and the consequences of his decisions. Unfortunately, there was no way to tell, so Naruto had no choice but to treat the man as a potential enemy and only pretend that he saw him as a grandfather figure. He would really like to have people he could trust besides his parents. The closest thing to friends he had were the owners of the ramen stand he had discovered about a month after leaving the orphanage. Most people tried to ignore him completely or were actually uninterested in his existence, while a few sent him hateful glares each time he ventured into the village. He had made a conscious effort of finding shops that were willing to deal with him. Most civilian shopkeepers refused to service him, either from genuine dislike or from the fear they would lose customers if it was discovered that the village pariah frequented their shop. Naruto had made careful note of which merchants were willing to deal with him at all, and which dealt fairly. It was a depressingly small number, but at last he had all his basic needs covered at an affordable price, even if some of those shops had been quite hard to find. Combined with the gathering of the edible plants that a child could reasonably learn of in the orphanage, it relieved the burden on his stipend quite handily. The shinobi shopkeepers were generally indifferent to him, but practically all their stores dealt in goods they either wouldn't sell to a 5-year-old that didn't even visited the academy or that were only of marginal interest to him. He still hadn't visited all shops in Konoha because he didn't want to let his minders get the idea that he was performing a systematic search. That would be definitely too much intelligence on part of a biologically 5.5-year-old kid. Which meant he had to disguise his efforts as effectively random wanderings through the village. On one such exploration tour of Konoha, he had happened upon the ramen stand of Tuchi and his daughter Ayame, who treated him well. The girl was about 5 years older than him and apparently found him very cute. After that initial meeting, Naruto visited their stand 1 time per week and had become one of their best regular customers after making sure that the Hokage visited them too as often as possible to compensate for the loss of business due to his presence. Ramen had quickly become one of his favorite foods, even if he preferred a more varied diet. His mother's lessons about dietary requirements of a growing boy had stuck, and he didn't want to risk the ire of his parents when they found out he didn't eat enough varied food. The threat of his father to make every food he ate taste like cardboard was enough of an incentive. That was another thing he had noticed since he left the orphanage. Now that he could eat as much as he wanted, or rather how much he could gather and afford, a formerly constant pull on his mother's chakra had virtually disappeared. It proved that he had been somewhat malnourished before and had needed the extra chakra to stay healthy. The 4 months of full meals had done wonders for him, and he was now a bit above average in size for his age group when he had been on the small side before. In addition, he had found that his stamina was shooting through the roof and promptly used it in the limited physical training he could do at his age. He wasn't about to turn into a combat monster anytime soon, but he was definitely on the high end of his peers. As Naruto didn't know any taijutsu styles, he aimed for a balanced training that would leave him all options open for later in his life. Currently, he was rummaging through the discarded products behind a store. Even if he could buy the necessities, it was much cheaper to pick up free stuff. He planned to create a disguise that would allow him to move more freely, but he still needed some makeup to make it work. The dumb whisker marks on his face would make it otherwise too easy to identify him. He knew shinobi used a technique to assume the forms of other people, but he didn't know enough to replicate it. Besides, he was pretty sure the shopkeepers employed some measures for detecting such a disguise. Otherwise, it would have been far too easy for academy students to cheat their way through the shops. With a glance at the sun, he determined it was time to return home. Even if most people seemed content with ignoring him, he didn't want to run into some drunks that had their inhibitions lowered by alcohol. That would change as soon as he was stealthy enough to avoid notice or quick enough to escape. On his way home, he saw some children with their parents going about their business. Each time he felt a spike of sadness that his parents couldn't be with him the entire time like it was for other families, but at least he knew that there were people that loved him unconditionally. He maintained some level of stress the entire time because there was no one who would make him feel safe. Only when he was with his parents he allowed himself to act like the child he was. His apartment got him some much desired privacy, but it wasn't exactly safe. He would have to lay some relatively harmless traps to delay possible intruders and create some avenues of escape. When he neared his apartment building, a thought struck him. Most of his neighbors had already left the building, and the rest kept mostly to themselves. The floor below his own apartment had been empty for some time already. With some work he would be able to create a trapdoor into the apartment underneath and hidden doors into the ones on the side. Such an increase in living space would prove useful later when he had more stuff. The only question was how he could hide it from prying eyes. Absorbed in his thoughts, he had already entered his rooms without really noticing it. After a moment of indecision, he decided to cook some stew. He had bought some dried meat and fresh vegetables earlier in the day, and some of his gathered herbs were nearing the end of their shelf life. When he stood on a chair to reach the pot on the stove, he felt a chakra connection snap into place. Great, the old man is once again spying on me. That is the third time this week. This is getting really irritating. After about 5 minutes, he felt the connection fade away. Or rather, the effect the connection had on his own chakra. Naruto wasn't able to detect chakra sources outside his body. Such a skill would need years of training to develop. His own large and still growing reserves would add some difficulty to that enterprise, but thanks to the internal chakra training his mother had invented, he could unfailingly detect if something or someone interacted with his chakra. That had been an unexpected discovery, for the methods had originally been developed with the goals of increasing one's reserves and control at a rapid pace, but the long-term usage of the training method gave one an acute sense of the chakra and the pathways it filled. If he used the method long enough, it would give him nearly unbeatable detection abilities against genjutsu. He would not necessarily be able to dispel it, but he would know when he was caught in one. His parents had been pleasantly surprised when they discovered that effect. When Naruto finished his meal and washed the dishes, he idly pondered how much longer Konoha would enjoy the benefits of electricity. He heard a lot of people talking about how some things were breaking down with increasing frequency and some goods were becoming almost impossible to procure. The power lines were sometimes decaying at a rapid pace and had to be replaced monthly. If the supply of new lines ran out, or whatever thing that produced the electricity failed, things would get difficult. Maybe I should buy a stove that can run off wood while the prices are still down? And perhaps some oil lamps too. Naruto mused while he got ready for bed. The fridge will be all but useless then. Tonight would be special. Instead of directly going to the world of his parents, his father would take over his body for a while. Not to do anything, no, but to observe the world around him. His body wouldn't even have to leave the bed. Now that his guards were gone, his parents felt they could risk it. His father didn't expect anything obvious to happen, but an attentive human nearby might still have noticed something. They didn't need to start rumors that his seal was failing. The reason Naruto looked forward to it was that his father would try to make magic work. Magic was so cool, and Naruto was eager to try it himself in the waking world. He hadn't learned anything practical since he had started studying, but was able to sense that magic seemed to be completely absent from this world. At his parents' place, he could feel it everywhere after his initial training, even if the feeling changed depending how his father modified the world. He had warned Naruto that it would take years until he could manage casting anything, but Naruto was patient. One day he would be able to turn these bullies from the orphanage into cute little bunnies. He hadn't decided if he would feed them to some animal or make them a present to some girl that would pet and play with them and weave colored bands into their fur, but it would be a great revenge for making his life hell. After a while he felt a gentle pull on his mind and let himself fall into the darkness. Instead of immediately waking up in his parents' world, the darkness stayed and surrounded him like a protective envelope. He could feel some emotions of love and pride leaking from somewhere into his mind. An indeterminable time later, the darkness lifted and he found himself looking into the smiling face of his mother. Naruto practically jumped to embrace her. "Mommy." In the waking world, darkness congealed into bizarre abstract shapes that would have driven a human observer irrevocably mad. A halo of otherworldly light clung close to the resting body of the blonde boy. After a few moments the light disappeared and the darkness was once again only the normal darkness of an unlit room. The body continued breathing slowly and deeply as when asleep, but it was anything but sleeping. Where normally the consciousness of an abnormal but still mainly human boy resided, an ancient alien intellect now sent feelers into the world it had not been able to observe directly for more than 2 years. It continued its silent observation until the strain on the boy's mind threatened to overwhelm the protection it had cast. The limit reached, it returned to the world at the edge of dreams to spend some time with its son. After a short while, the boy's mind returned to his now peacefully sleeping body. His face sported a content smile. From his perspective, Naruto had just spent more than a week with his parents while mere moments passed in the waking world. "Welcome back, Kit," Yuko said while cuddling with the excited boy in her arms. They were sitting on a large pile of furs in the wooden cottage that had been the place of their first meeting. Although Naruto knew that his parents weren't human and they could rearrange the landscape pretty much on their whim, the homely house remained a place of emotional significance. The house and the surrounding woods were therefore kept stable and they had to travel to other places if they wanted to do some large-scale environmental modification. It had become somewhat of a tradition for Naruto to wake up here and spend a day or two with his parents like a relatively normal family before starting the various activities that the world on the edge of dreams allowed. After a short while, an almost man-sized silvery fox entered the cottage and transformed into a black-haired man before joining them in the cuddle. After planting some kisses on his mate and son, the trio sat in silence for some time, simply enjoying the other's presence. In the end, Naruto's curiosity got the better of him and caused him to break the silence. "Well, how did it go? How long until I can use magic outside? When do you teach me cool spells?" "Patience, son, patience. I barely started to get a grip on the situation. The magic is there, it's just buried, for a lack of proper word." "What do you mean by buried?" How to explain? Image a lake. Everyone is swimming on the surface, and for this scenario diving is impossible. Normally magic would be drifting in the water but not really intermixing like heavy oil, so you could reach into the water and pull some out. In our case, the water is completely clear. If you go deep enough, you reach the bottom of the lake. The magic in this world is somehow buried under this bottom and therefore completely out of reach. Do you understand? I think I do. Good, but remember, this is merely a simplification of that particular aspect. It's wrong in every other way. Now Yuko entered the conversation. "How long until you can set the magic free?" "It will be difficult and time-consuming. I will have to literally pierce the barrier and create some sort of leak. You and I produce our own magic, but because we're trapped behind the seal we can't really use it. Every little bit I want to use I have to channel through Naruto, and the more I channel the greater the danger for him becomes. During the possession I'm uncomfortably close to him in the mental sense, and I fear leakage of my thought processes and memories." Naruto looked confused. "Why would that be dangerous to me? There are different kinds of knowledge. Normal everyday knowledge that is essentially harmless, like what grass is. Knowledge which is dangerous for others, like knowing how to wield a sword. Then there is knowledge that can hurt yourself too if you use it. The most dangerous kind is the one where pure possession of the knowledge is enough to hurt yourself." Daiki looked Naruto directly into the eyes. "I love you as my son, but you must never forget that I'm not human. Sure, most of the time I'm wearing a human or animal form, but that is not what I truly am, and neither is your mother. I'm far older than the entire human race. If you came into contact with what I truly am without proper shielding, it would destroy you." Seeing Naruto's incomprehension, he continued. "It's not that I would want to hurt you, it would simply happen. Think of a common earthworm. A simple creature, but quite well equipped for its chosen environment. What would such a being do with optical information, with colors and geometric forms? Would it be able to understand the concept of a starlit sky? In some respects you are like the earthworm. You have your familiar senses and human frame of reference, even if we're trying to expand that. There are far more things in the countless universes than you can possibly conceive of. You would have no starting point to understand most of my memories. The problem is that my memories want to be understood. If you would tap into them, voluntary or not, they would try to warp your mind until it fit the memory's requirements." He sighed deeply. A human mind is an incredibly fragile thing. It would simply shatter under that much pressure. Your mind is more stable than most, but far from sufficient. That is one of the main objectives of your magical training, to be able to withstand the onslaught of alien concepts and thought. Even when the magic is freely available, it's only too easy to invoke or tap into something that would drive most humans instantly mad. Naruto had grown silent during the explanation. He thought he understood most parts, but it was difficult to wrap his mind around the concept of knowledge that was dangerous out of itself. "I suppose that's part of the problem. I can't understand it, but if I encounter it I can't simply shut it out. Like these cubes with more than 6 sides Daddy showed me some time ago. Looking at them hurt, but I could always avert my eyes. If something like that is in my mind I can't do that. Memory suppression takes time, and by then it might be too late." The boy listened as his father and mother entered into a discussion about magic he simply couldn't follow anymore. His vocabulary and understanding was already greater than that of most normal 10-year-olds, but here he could barely understand one sentence in 20. It only served to cement his desire to learn more. Someday I will be able to understand all of this, even if it takes decades. That's a goal worth working for. Naruto couldn't take it anymore. The blasted crystal ball had to go. He could never be certain at what time the Hokage would decide to take a peek, and it was driving him slowly mad. It wouldn't have been that bad if he hadn't been able to sense the connection, but with things as they were he would develop a severe case of paranoia if it didn't stop soon. Luckily the Hokage hadn't seen anything suspicious so far, but it was only a matter of time. Which was why he and his parents had come up with a plan. It wasn't much of a plan. Basically it called for him to be in the Hokage's office and arrange a distraction so that the old man would leave. After that he would cede control of his body to his father for a few seconds, long enough to disable the crystal ball. Naruto didn't know what his father would do and he didn't care. The only important thing was that the constant spying ceased. Last time the Sandaime had seen him taking a dump, and he valued his privacy thank you very much. To his credit the old man had cut the connection immediately, but that was hardly a consolation. "What's this thing, old man?" he asked while pointing at a large scroll sitting on a table nearby. "That is the Forbidden Scroll, Naruto. I'm consulting it to identify an odd seal one of my shinobi encountered a short time ago." Forbidden Scroll, Interesting, definitely a thing to remember for the future. To get into the Hokage's office had been easy enough. He had simply asked the old man to be allowed to watch him work for a day. Before he had come here he had set his distraction plan in motion. In fact, the results should become noticeable any moment now. A secretary burst into the room. "Hokage-sama, there is a disturbance between the Uchiha and Hyuga clan heads downstairs. We fear it will come to blows soon. Both claim they have scheduled a meeting with you at the same time about some insulting letters that the other one has sent them." "I'm coming." The old man turned towards Naruto. "Stay here, Naruto. I'll be right back." Perfect. It had been easy to find official-looking stationery, fill it with insults about the other clan and smuggle it to their doorsteps. A second set of letters with the meeting schedule had been deposited earlier. Normally such an idiotically simple scheme would never have worked, but tensions were high because some Uchiha children had pulled a similar stunt 2 weeks before and the two clan heads hated each other. Normally he stayed away from any Uchiha. His mother had somewhat of a grudge against them and he found their eyes creepy, but the opportunity had been too tempting. The situation downstairs would be resolved in a few minutes, but a few minutes were all he needed. Naruto played easily bored child and began to wander the room. Naturally the Sandaime didn't really leave him alone. There were 4 Anbu in the room who would interfere if he did something suspicious. He innocently poked a few of the knickknacks the Sandaime kept in this office until he reached his destination. Before him on a shelf sat the dreaded crystal ball. Feigning an interest he bent towards it. He quickly checked the position of the invisible Anbu guards in the room. Perfect, none of them will be able to see what I'm about to do, he thought before initiating the next stage by pulling on his mother's chakra, which she would tell his father, thereby getting things underway. Naruto's eyes changed to obsidian black orbs as Daiki took control. He poked the crystal ball carefully with a finger while scanning it with his other senses. Old, possibly several centuries. Minerals form a non-visible intricate seal structure threading through the entire sphere. Very likely protected against simple physical damage. That left only one possible course of action. Daiki didn't want to outright destroy the artifact, which would be impossible to do in an inconspicuous way anyway. If Naruto was in danger it would be safer if the Sandaime had a method of checking on him quickly, but they didn't want him spying on Naruto constantly. Fortunately he had now enough knowledge of this world to solve the problem. A tiny gray flicker shot from the tip of his finger, hit the sphere and enveloped it before fading. There, it was done. From now on the Sandaime would find something else to do whenever he contemplated using the crystal ball to specifically spy on Naruto. Still, it would only avert the old man's idle curiosity. The subtle compulsion could be overcome if he thought the reason important enough, and he used the sphere rarely enough that he wouldn't really notice anything amiss. The spell would hold for perhaps 2 months if they were lucky, but by then the Hokage should be broken out of his casual spying habits. It was a steady temptation to throw magic around like candy now that he could use it, but that would have been impractical. Direct behavioral changes would be immediately noticed by the victim or the victim's friends, and he couldn't channel the necessary power to make them stick anyway. A weak compulsion that was activated a few times per month to cause a slight shifting of the victim's attention was possible, but nothing more suspicious. The transformation of the eyes was bad enough, and he still wasn't sure why it happened. All the other side effects of the possession he had been able to suppress after a few tries, but the eye issue stubbornly refused to yield. It had probably something to do with some eyes are the windows of the soul crap in this universe. He could do a bit more energy-intensive stuff with Naruto's body, like teleporting and flying around, but not for long. They had really to advance their plan to make magic more easily accessible, but it would be dangerous. He couldn't channel any significant amount of power without endangering Naruto's sanity to an unreasonable degree. It really was a quandary. They were nearly helpless if someone came after Naruto, but to change that they would have to put their beloved son in a great deal of danger. Still, it had to be done and soon. The boy's eyes returned to their normal appearance when Daiki retreated behind the seal. Naruto had spent the last few seconds in a comfortable darkness, but was able to take over seamlessly. He moved on to examine the next knick-knack. He didn't know if the operation had been successful, but he fervently hoped so. It didn't take long for the Hokage to return. Naruto spent the rest of the afternoon watching him work. From what Naruto could see, the old man clearly had a shitty job. Wasting his time with tons of paperwork wasn't Naruto's idea of fun. He was becoming slightly annoyed by the Sandame's continuing subtle attempts of praising his office. Apparently he wanted Naruto to aspire to become the next Hokage without directly saying it. Fat chance with me being a Jinchuriki. I wonder if he sees it as parenting or manipulating me. After all, if I'm striving after such a lofty goal, there are all sorts of hoops he can have me jump through. During Naruto's brief lapse in attention, the Hokage had begun to look at him with a thoughtful expression. When Naruto was about to leave the office for the evening, the old man asked him a question he hadn't expected for quite some time. Naruto, how would you like to join the Shinobi Academy next year? Naruto was surprised by this offer and was momentarily speechless, but he quickly recovered. Wow, so soon? That would be great, old man. Thanks. Before he left the office, he did a little victory dance, and he could be heard shouting, "I'm becoming a shinobi. I'm becoming a shinobi," on his entire way out of the tower. And I didn't really know what to do and simply agreed. Was that the right decision? The old man has been trying to get me interested in the shinobi lifestyle as long as I can remember, and I displayed some enthusiasm for it. I think you did the right thing. After all his influence, it would have been decidedly suspicious if you didn't jump at that offer. Daiki said. The important question is, what do you want? I mean, what do you want to do with your life? You should have enough experience by now to make some preliminary decisions. Naruto sat back in his chair and thought hard. What did he truly want? Freeing his parents was his top priority, but he hadn't the slightest inkling of how to do that. Daiki had already warned him that under no circumstances he was to release the seal. Apparently bad things would happen if he did that. A family for sure. He had asked his parents about possible siblings some time ago but had been disappointed because their imprisonment prevented them from procreating. Still, that was quite some time in the future. He was only 5 going on 6, plus his time with his parents. Magic. It was just so cool and useful, because you could do all sorts of things with it. He wanted to learn everything about it. Hunting. Naruto really liked the wilderness, discovering new species of animals as well as plants and exploring new regions. The contest of skill and strength between hunter and hunted fascinated him. Shinobi were certainly interesting and he didn't mind becoming one, but it wasn't his heart's desire. When he told his parents about his thoughts, they looked interested and pleased. These are certainly worthy goals. It will be many years before you become truly proficient in magic though, and you would be terribly vulnerable in the meantime. There are enemies to consider. Enemies? Yes, enemies, and I don't talk about people who simply don't like you. There are many who covet the power of the tailed beasts, and some may decide to come after you. Furthermore, Konoha will never let you go for the same reason. As long as you are associated with Konoha, the village's enemies will be your enemies too, and there are quite a lot of them. Then there are beings who might attack you because of us. They might have noticed your father entering this world, but we are uncertain. He definitely tried to be as inconspicuous as possible. Yuko explained. Then there is the matter that we still don't know how useful the magic of this world will be in direct combat for you. It would be reckless to expect it to be. You need to become a shinobi to learn to fight, and a good one at that. It should be possible to combine it with your passion for hunting. Tracking and laying traps are important shinobi skills, and your massive chakra reserves will enable you to use a lot of jutsu later. What about becoming Hokage? I don't really want the job. You're right, but there is an alternative. I think it would be best for you to tell everyone that your dream is founding a new clan and becoming clan head. It will appear slightly more realistic to people than becoming Hokage, and it is indeed something you want to achieve. After all, what are clans other than large family groups? It's still similar enough to the old man's intentions to deflect undue suspicion. Naruto thought about it. Becoming a shinobi would take care of his need for security and open a new field for the application of his wilderness survival skills. Chakra wasn't that different from magic in many aspects, and jutsus were cool. He wanted a big family so that he would never be alone again, and it didn't make a lot of difference if it was the start of a clan. Yes, he would follow that path. Decision made, he jumped up from his seat, pumped his fist into the air and shouted, "I'm Naruto Uzumaki and I will become the first leader of my own clan." Looking at his parents he asked, "How was that?" Both adults chuckled. "Quite convincing, son. Do you truly want to follow this path? We think it for the best, but it is ultimately your life and your decision. We'll find another way if you don't want to." Nodding, he answered, "Yes, I'm certain. And thanks for giving me the choice. We will always give you as much choice as possible. Now, concerning the release of magic, I've made some progress. Next time I will." When Daiki became active on the next cycle he wasted no time before teleporting his son's body several kilometers into the sky. The air was very cold at this height, but Naruto had dressed himself in several layers of heavy clothing for just this opportunity. Each environmental hazard that he didn't need to compensate for freed a small amount of magic for other uses. On this night he was searching for a suitable location he could use to create the first planned spring of magic. The spring would be vulnerable at first, meaning he needed a seldom traveled area that was still close enough to Konoha to be easily accessible. As he surveyed the landscape he had to discard several promising locations because someone was already using them as hideouts, training grounds or travel lanes. Finally he found what he was searching for. The area wasn't the most inaccessible, but it was still almost never entered. It was simply completely ordinary and had no easily traversable connections to anywhere important. The different mountain ridges in Konoha's vicinity made it uncomfortable to approach, especially because there was absolutely nothing of interest there that made a trip worth it. It was only about 10 kilometers from Konoha as the crow flies, but the distance was easily double that for any earthbound traveler. In short, it was perfect for his plans. Unfortunately his limit was already almost exhausted. A closer inspection would have to wait until next week. He teleported his son's body back into his apartment before getting rid of the now superfluous extra clothing. Casually he noted the strain the multiple teleports caused Naruto's body as he carefully lowered it onto the bed. It was bearable, but it seemed prudent to limit the teleports to the necessary minimum in the future. Naruto was excited. Today would be the day his father would try to pierce the barrier and establish a spring of magic. His parents had warned him forcefully of the dangers the endeavor posed before they asked his consent, which he had given. He thought himself aware enough to make such decisions himself, even if he still relied on the counsel of his parents to a large degree. His 6th birthday was coming up next month, and in the new year he would join the Shinobi Academy. It was very early for that. Most of the children his age would not enter for 2 years, but apparently the Hokage thought him mature enough. No wonder, he had spent around 5 or 6 additional years behind the seal by now. His training was only hampered by his physical development. There were sharp limits what you could do with such a young body, and he wouldn't risk his health by overtraining. After he had created several disguises and the spying tendencies of the old man were curbed, he had begun to explore the woods surrounding Konoha. There were several small camps of woodcutters and hunters some distance away from the village that provided it with food, timber and other woodland resources. Even if they were too far away for him to visit regularly, it was easy to masquerade as the son of one of the workers who was sent to the village sometimes to trade the goods his family produced. It was nothing out of the ordinary for the children to do that as the woods were considered safe, and there was no place for idle mouths in most families. Nobody batted an eye when he sold the fur or other parts of the critters he managed to bring down on the visitors' marketplace while wearing his disguise. He limited himself mainly to small game that he could catch with snares or shoot down with a sling stone. Some rooms in an abandoned building had been converted to a workshop where he could process his kills without anyone being the wiser. One thing he had noticed was that village security sucked badly. Strangers came and went every day, and the guards at the official gates only made a cursory inspection, if even that. After a bit of exploring, he had already found several illegal entrances in Konoha's walls, which he used frequently. The inside of the village was somewhat better guarded by the Konoha police force and the occasional Anbu patrol, but it was a far cry from secure in his opinion. Well, there's nothing I can do about that aside from using it to my advantage. Soon he felt himself drifting to sleep, but something was different this time. The familiar timeless darkness that surrounded him each time he went to see his parents was somehow thinning. He could still feel his father's love for him, but more and more other things were leaking through. Some he could identify, like worry for the future or intense concentration, but the longer this state continued, the more alien the feelings became and the more uncomfortable he felt. Naruto could vaguely feel the flow of a lot of power somewhere behind the protective darkness. Then the power spiked, and the darkness dissolved. It was like a veil had been ripped away. He was hurled violently in random directions by a giant maelstrom, incoherent bits of alien thoughts ripping into his mind. He wanted to scream but found he had no mouth. Colors not found in any rainbow and impossible forms flashed before his eyes, each driving a spike of pain into his brain as it was forced to experience something it wasn't meant to. Naruto suppressed and purged the impressions as much and as fast as he could, but he was just overwhelmed. He observed a triangle with 16 sides and a cube with only 2. A flight of stairs that only went up formed an unbroken circle. A space that was bigger on the inside than the outside. Strange symbols formed greater structures that belonged to giant forms which threaded into infinity but were only part of something much larger that was in turn only a building block of. When he thought he couldn't take it anymore, the chaos calmed somewhat and the pain lessened. Naruto was now drifting weightlessly in a space with no discernible borders. Multicolored mists wafted around, and strange bubbles were hovering in the air. Somewhere in the distance he could see the chaotic stream that had held him before. As he neared a bubble, a tendril lashed out and connected to him. Immediately his surroundings dissolved into a completely different scene. A pitch-black man that was only the visible part of something far bigger was writing in a book made out of human skin in a dark void. The finished work would sow delicious chaos in the ranks of the lesser beings. Suddenly he seemed to notice something and looked directly at the observer, who gave the mental equivalent to a nod and withdrew. He found himself somewhat disoriented back in the space from before. Now he knew what these bubbles were. They were memories of a sort, but they contained so much more than he could fathom. There were alien sensory impressions that went beyond his understanding, and concepts that slipped through his mind while leaving a painful tear behind. More and more bubbles came his way, eager to share their contents with him. As soon as he managed to free himself from one, the next was already there. 4 figures of great and evil power stood high above a world made of wailing red faces under a black sun. Before them a small army of humans was encircled by a number of misshapen creatures. A cripple was standing alone before the 4 demons, soundlessly uttering the words, "I submit." Before he was enveloped by a cocoon and the slaughter of the humans below them began. An enormous entity made of pure cold crystal in a void surrounded by a protective screen of neutron stars pondered how it could break the boundaries of its universe to find new feeding grounds after it devoured the last few remnants of life that remained in this one. Buildings rose from a blue-green world into the emptiness of space, forming a solid shell. But it expanded further, its masters creating matter and energy from nothingness to realize their dreams of a perfect world. Further and further they spread, until even the machines they created could no longer find the end and beginnings of the gargantuan structure. A plague swept through, killing the masters, and the whole thing descended into senseless madness. Servants without their purpose turned against those they were created to protect, adding to the chaos until, unseen, he knocked a tiny part of the mechanism of worlds a bit out of alignment. Nothing happened on the surface for a long time, but small disharmonies were created, gathered, multiplied, until the great mechanism ripped itself apart, bringing millions of worlds down with it in its destruction. His plan was successful, the forced stalemate was broken and room for new growth created. Now he only had tea. Mountains of screaming flesh sprawled under a sky of blood, ever-changing yet constant in their grotesque mockery of life. He exhaled the breath of life, and the seeds were sown in the dead world. In the far future, in the deepest depths of the seas dwelled the Deep Daughter, for the black water extended into every world. Preparing for the war against the land dwellers, fortresses of black gold grew while her many tentacled servants forged weapons from. His drifting speed increased, and he could feel his consciousness fraying under the onslaught of alien thoughts and memories. The more normal ones he could take even if they were quite frightening, but the more alien ones tried to twist his mind until he could understand them fully. Even worse, each bubble twisted in a different direction. With a supreme effort of will he tore himself from the stream and lunged at one glowing structure to the side that felt somehow different. Abruptly the pain ended. Naruto found himself flying along a path surrounded by a bottomless abyss, a small fox sitting on his shoulder with a gleaming collar around his neck. A chain with links made out of the symbols, Mother, Father, and Seal, connected to an identical collar on Naruto's throat. A gagged monkey with a blindfold over his eyes and rolled paper stuffed into his ears sat on a pillar in the distance before him, beckoning him closer with a funny hat in his hand. A banner hung behind him with sentences written on it. He only managed to read 2 before the banner flapped in the wind, hiding the script. I don't know who your parents are. I don't know why the villagers hate you. Ghostly faces he had seen in the village before were floating around him. Hundreds of hands grabbed at him, a select few shoving him forward, some pulling him down and some trying to hold him in place. Finally he left them behind. About 1 or 2 dozen lights were now accompanying him, mostly filled with the images of children around his age. 2 voices were speaking. Friends only hold you back. Having precious people to protect makes you truly strong. Blurred forms crossed his path, some trying to block his advance and others urging him on. Most were too distorted to discern, but some stood out. A faceless man with a giant sword and a girl made of soft snow made to attack him, only to change and urge him on before they suddenly crumbled to dust. A tanuki made of sand with bloody claws howled madly in loneliness before it spotted him and started to attack. A white snake slithered in the background, shedding scales that grew into distorted figures which proceeded to attack him. The snake climbed the pillar and brought the monkey down in a great cloud of dust from which only the wounded snake emerged. A wrinkled slug who wore a face mask depicting a young woman and held a sake bottle in one tendril took the monkey's place, swaying dangerously. A black-haired boy with red-black spinning eyes appeared before him, a spike of crackling lightning in his hand. He thrust it forward, but Naruto couldn't see if it was aimed at him or one of his companions. The snake hovered in the background, smiling approvingly while a crow with similar red-black eyes cawed overhead. Hate gives you power. A toad with white hair took him away, running a long time in circles before returning to the path only a short distance from where they started while a chorus of smaller toads croaked a song about prophecies. Faster and faster the specters came and went, leaving him hardly enough time to note some of the shapes. A beautiful seahorse bound with an ugly lash. A lovely flower encased in rotten ice. A shining angel riding a black dragon with many heads. The mad rush stopped, and Naruto was able to perceive more of his surroundings again. Formless shapes wearing black cloaks with red clouds were circling him, only to dissolve in strands of shadow one by one. During their dancing they slaughtered countless people, who were walking blindly around them, unaware of the danger they were in. We want peace for the world. 6 orange-haired people standing shoulder to shoulder blocked his way, their features blurred and ever-changing. A corpse with reddish hair sat in an iron throne from which streams of blood flowed, barely visible threads connecting him to the 6 bodies before him. His eyes were dead things with concentric rings inside them, hinting at an unfathomable power. A white paper flower was orbiting the throne, slowly losing its petals until only a bare pedestal remained. Pain leads to peace. Behind the corpse on its bloody throne of iron stood a masked man with only one dark eye. The dark eye changed to a mixture of blood red and black in a strange geometric shape. It grew until it filled the entire horizon, looking down on an empty world made out of fire, corpses and streams of blood while piles of ash and white-black vines moved around senselessly. The only lasting peace is the peace of the grave. Darkness swallowed all, but he could sense something moving in the darkness. Suddenly countless candles littered a featureless plain, each flame the shape of a living being. He saw humans, animals, even plants, but something was rapidly snuffing out the lights. Soon, he stood once again alone in the darkness. A grotesque creature made out of bone and shadow appeared before him, putrid with corruption. The stench of rotting corpses hung thick around it in a miasmatic cloud. Pale human forms without an inner light or life were lying on the ground and kissing the creature's feet. I am death. All paths end with me. Join the ranks of my worshippers, and I shall grant you the boundless freedom to destroy whatever you wish. Panic engulfed him. He wanted nothing to do with that thing. Fleshless fingers tried to grasp him when he turned to flee. They were pinching, holding, shaking, choking. The entire scenery shattered, and for a moment he was again in the chaotic maelstrom before everything went dark again. This darkness was different. It bore more resemblance to the usual protective darkness his father exuded, but it was far grander than anything he felt before. Slowly his vision re-established itself. The darkness wasn't truly dark. There were countless stars scattered across the jet-black firmament. A big and yellowish-white moon rose rapidly and bathed him in his soft, soothing light. He could feel the tears in his mind slowly closing and relaxed. When the moon reached the zenith, its movement stopped and 13 bright stars appeared in a circle around it. Naruto could see after a fashion. He was standing some distance from a large dark lake. Beautiful trees and other plants made of crystal were swaying gently in a breeze he couldn't feel, glittering in the moonlight. A deep feeling of peace filled him as he slowly approached the black lake. Its surface was as smooth as glass, but when he looked into its depths the darkness cleared. It was like a mirror, but it didn't show an exact reflection. It was like he was looking into another sky from the underside of the water surface. While the plants on his side were mainly white, blue, silver, purple and black, their mirror images on the other side were mainly composed of gold, red, orange, yellow and green. The sky was blue like at noon instead of black and speckled with stars, and in place of the moon the sun was blazing. Strangely, the corona was clearly visible and shaped like 13 flames. Naruto caught himself a moment before falling headfirst into the lake. He was feeling unbelievably tired, and the soothing surroundings made going to sleep incredibly easy. But somehow he knew that it would be the deadliest mistake he could ever make. If he lost the grip on his consciousness here, he would never wake again. This world around him wasn't hostile or hurting him, but it was so much greater than him that he would lose himself. Slowly, Naruto began to back away from the lake. Each movement was costing him incredible willpower, and every part of his body screamed for rest. He had to get away from here. With a cry, Naruto awoke in his bed in the familiar cottage, his heart thumping rapidly. He was drenched in sweat and breathing heavily. His mother Yuko kneeled beside him, an expression of worry on her face and a hand firmly gripping his shoulder. He practically flew into her embrace and hugged her with all his power while he began to cry in relief while Yuko patted his back and made soothing sounds. After a while Naruto calmed down and fell asleep, still cradled in his mother's lap. Suddenly Daiki appeared in the room, looking worried. Yuko looked at her mate. "What is the kid's condition, and how did it go outside?" she asked. "Naruto's sanity took some damage, but nothing we can't fix in time. I managed to push him into a relatively harmless region of my consciousness and have already provisionally patched up all the wounds in our son's mind. Before the end he touched upon my prophetic abilities, but after a few days he should be back to normal. Still, the damage under the patches will take quite some time to truly heal. I will have to reduce my possessions of his body to once per month for the foreseeable future." He sat down on the bed, one arm around his mate's back while he used the other to stroke some errant hairs from Naruto's face. The creation of the spring went well. I had to use a lot of power, almost the complete amount I could channel with Naruto in the way, but I was successful. I couldn't stay long to watch, but after the initial shockwave the flow seemed nice and steady. Contrary to my earlier statement, I will have to take a quick look as soon as possible to make certain things stay on track. Only about a minute, that shouldn't put any undue stress on Naruto. Nobody but us should be aware that something changed in the world, but that is probably a bit optimistic. Aside from the shockwave, the spring is only a local phenomenon and should be virtually undetectable, but I will begin to add defenses as soon as practical. All in all, things went as good as we could reasonably expect. "So the new plan is making progress?" Yuko asked before she laid her head on Daiki's shoulder. Indeed, my dear Vixen. With access to free magic, things should go smoother. I will be able to do more with less strain on Naruto, and our son should soon be ready to use some minor magic. It will help him and us greatly. But I think we will have to explain more to him soon. Naruto sighed in relief when he purged the last dangerous memories from his mind. It had taken him several days to restore everything, even if his father had helped. His mind still felt somewhat raw, but he was getting better. He kept some things that weren't actively dangerous, like the strange vision or the memories of his visit to the Land of Night. He had to talk with his parents about these too. The opportunity came on the next evening. What was that dark place? It reminded me strongly of you, but it was so grand, it felt like it would swallow me. I purposely pushed you into that region of my mind, son. It was far safer than all the alternatives. But why was the feeling of the place so strong? The other things I saw were strange, but had not the same intensity. That is because of what we are. That place was a visualization of my divinity. We are gods, Naruto. Gods? Like in the stories, or what some of the villagers worship. In some ways, yes, but most deities that are worshipped here don't even exist. There are a few, but they aren't especially active. You don't really look like gods. Daiki raised an eyebrow. You've already seen that we can turn into foxes and command great powers. In addition, Yuko told you she was the Kyuubi, which was a mountain-sized fox demon. You've learned about magic and different worlds that nobody else knows about. After all this, you doubt our claim on godhood? Naruto shrugged. Yes. His parents communicated with a short look into each other's eyes and seemingly came to a decision. Simultaneously, they change. Their combined presence filled the room with power while lights and shadows without a source glided about every surface. Silvery waves seemed to constantly run through Daiki's dark hair while Yuko's mane began to glow in a golden light. But the most obvious change was the eyes. His father's eyes were abyssal black orbs, but after a moment a pupil less pale yellow iris appeared. When he looked closer, he saw tiny specks of light dancing in the black part of the eyes. All in all, they looked like the moon before the night sky. Yuko's eyes had lost their pupil as well and were now a burning red color with a golden iris. It bore a striking resemblance to a sunset. These are the forms that are closest to our divine nature that still bear a human shape, but we can look any way we want. Daiki said before cycling through different human forms. Old and young, fat and slender, none of them bore any resemblance to his usual appearance. After the humans, he assumed the forms of different animals and finally fantastic creatures before returning to his standard shape. Naruto wore a bored expression. Peeved, try another thing. That's hardly more impressive than turning into a fox. Yoko had watched Naruto closely and stopped Daiki with a raised hand when he was about to do something even more spectacular. I think that's enough of a show. Naruto, did you say that just to get a rise out of us? Aforementioned boy now wore a slightly guilty expression and rubbed his head sheepishly. Yeah, sorry, but I want to see something really impressive. It has been a long time since the castle construction. His mother turned to his father with narrowed eyes. I told you that the idiotic castle was a bad idea, but no. Mr. Showoff had to do something that would corrupt the mind of our impressionable son. Now see what you've done. We tell our son that we are gods and he simply uses that to get us to show him something impressive. He shows absolutely no respect to beings of cosmic power. What do you have to say for yourself? She asked in an angry voice. To Naruto's surprise, his father wore a smug expression. I say mission accomplished. That answer threw both Yuko and Naruto completely off course. You did all that deliberately? Yes, I did all that showy stuff in the hope that Naruto would react exactly as he did. With all that strange crap that exists in the outside world, there is no worse thing than going all, ooh, and, ah, when somebody with an impressive power shows up or unexpected developments happen. If some hostile idiot tries to show off, it's better to keep your cool and either shove a combat technique into the enemy's face or simply make a tactical retreat while he's busy parading his powers around. It's also a great way to rile up overly proud enemies. But be careful when you use that strategy, some people react rather poorly to it. Yes, Daddy. But how did you become gods? The Kyuubi was clearly a demon when it was last seen. The difference between gods and demons isn't as great as most people believe. We ascended, or in my case descended, to godhood when we pledged ourselves to each other for eternity and our natures mixed. Our domains are a bit unclear at the current time, but I'm mostly associated with the moon, stars, darkness, mystery and general ethereal themes. Yuko deals with the sun, light, life and the more corporeal side of things, but we can easily use the power of the other. Together we are the mirrored path of light and shadow. The mirror lake I saw. Yes, that was a representation of our connection. Daiki answered. We are that way since we forged our bond, but we still retain and share parts of what we were before. Someday you might get to see the memory of our bonding. I was the Kyuubi, and therefore we both have the form of tailed beast still available, even if the label, 9 tails doesn't fit either of us anymore. Your father was something that even most gods have no name for or are even aware of. Yuko added. Actually, there are a lot of names. Eldritch Abomination, Outer God, Cosmic Horror, the names are legion, but they refer mostly to the far less powerful of my kind. But I don't really belong in that category anymore. As I am now, even the weakest could wipe me from existence with barely a thought. I was only a few hours from my ultimate demise before the pact saved my existence. Some of my reality warping powers and worldview remain, but I mostly contributed the magic to our bond. I can't understand myself what I once was, I've lost too much for that. Add to that the memories of thousands of human lives and untold preserved memories of the avatars I created before my fall, and you get an inkling of what we truly are. Was it all an act? You acting as my parents, I mean? Naruto asked. No, the human side of us you have known for the longest time is simply one of our aspects. Think of it as the faces of a crystal. They can be different, but they are parts of the same thing. And all the parts love you. Naruto was nearly overwhelmed by the revelation, but his training helped him to come to grips with the reality of the situation. He reduced it to the most important facts. Naruto had already known that his parents were no humans, the details hardly mattered. What difference did it make if his mother was a tailed beast or a goddess? The important fact was that they loved him, everything else was immaterial. Okay, I guess. Does that change anything between us? No, but you deserve the truth. We might use some of my memories from other worlds for training purposes. At least some of them are safe for you to experience. And we don't need to pretend to be human-ish the entire time, that feels simply constraining. What about the things I saw on the path? The monkey, the snake, the corpses? The future is ever-changing while time flows. I do have prophetic abilities, but you should never rely on knowledge of the future. You tapped into my power, and received a vision of what may come. That doesn't mean it will actually happen. Before I sealed the pact, I mapped out the possible futures for Kyuubi and indirectly you. The attack on you was completely unexpected. Nobody had tried or would ever try to deliberately free the Kyuubi by attacking your mind. The chances of that happening were zero at the time of my vision. In the short time since the storm, things had already changed to such a large degree that the formerly impossible happened simply because I entered this world, and we were blindsided. We relied on my vision, and it totally derailed our original plan. What do you mean? What was the original plan? Yuko sighed. The original plan was to consolidate our bond and internal structure before Daiki would emerge from the seal and undo it from the outside. With both of us free, we would take you to a place far away from any potential danger and find a loving family for you. Had the attack happened only 2 weeks later, we would have been ready. But it was not to be, and you will have to face the threats we would have shielded you from. You would have sent me away? We do love you, but you would have been safely out of harm's way. Besides, at that point in time we would have never truly met. It was a quite unremarkable destiny we envisioned for you, but now it will never happen. Too many people have their own plans for the destiny of Naruto Uzumaki, Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Yoko. We will stay forever with you even if we should manage to escape this prison, if you let us. Of course I want you to stay with me. But what's the new plan? We have a few basic goals, like get you to a level where you can survive against most threats and simultaneously enable you to live a happy life. Find a way out of our prison that doesn't hurt you or us. Bring magic back into the world. Attain world domination in a spiritual sense and either kick the competitors out or form a pantheon with the more reasonable ones. Things like that, Yuko said in a flippant way. Some knowledge from my visions is still usable, and we try to guide you on the best possible path. But ultimately, you must choose your own destiny. You must make your own decisions one day, as it is we can only speak once per week. We have faith that you will make the right decisions. Sorry young man, we don't carry such things. Okay, thank you for your time. Bye. Naruto left the shop, grumbling under his breath. What was the problem with this village and footwear? He had nothing against sandals in general, but he wanted protection for his toes, damn it. Thorns, splinters and the dangers of animal bites were reason enough for him to prefer closed boots during his excursions into the forest. Let alone that he didn't want to get his feet wet each time he happened to step into a puddle. But to his increasing frustration, reasonable footwear seemed to be completely unavailable. In a few days he would enter the academy, and he didn't fancy the handling of sharp tools that could easily slip out of his hands and hit his feet without some layer of protection. Unfortunately, it seemed he would have to do without that. Naruto had managed to purchase all other supplies he needed without too much problems. His kunai, shuriken and other shinobi instruments were all of reasonable quality and should see him safely through most of his academy years. He had seen no need to fork over the money for top-quality products, sturdy and workable would be enough for now. The time for high-quality tools would come as soon as he had the skill to make proper use of them. His earlier scouting of the different shops had paid off big time. He shuddered to think what overpriced crap he would have been sold had he simply wandered into the next available shop. The academy provided the tools for use on campus, but it was widely known that one had to train in one's free time to become truly proficient, and for that extra training Naruto needed his own tools. Briefly he had entertained the possibility of scavenging from the training fields, but a bit of research had shown that this wasn't allowed or even practical. The fields were cleared and repaired by genin and some chunin belonging to the maintenance division each day. Lost and found items made up part of their salary, and they wouldn't take kindly to scavenging attempts on his part that would hurt their profit margin. If he was spotted he would have to pay quite a bit of fines, and he didn't consider the risk worth it at the current time. Have you heard? They allowed him to visit the academy. Really? What are they thinking, allowing him to become a shinobi? Oh yes, the lovely villagers were once again gossiping about him. The whispers had died somewhat down after he left the orphanage and stayed mostly out of sight, but ever after the knowledge of him visiting the academy had spread they had picked up again. He had even replaced the recent death of the fire daimyo as one of the most discussed subjects. Due to his increased hearing he understood most whispers clearly, making him quite well informed. Naruto wasn't able to divine the truth from the various rumors, but apparently the middle-aged daimyo had died unexpectedly and without foul play. Unfortunately the succession was unclear, and several pretenders vied for the throne whilst the land of fire was slowly descending into chaos. The main reason for the chaos was the economic upheaval after the sources for several important trade goods dried up around the time of his father's arrival in this world. Naruto had always been curious about the cobbled-together look of many pieces of technology or buildings. His parents had shown him some other worlds, and it looked totally different. Things actually fit together there. In addition, nobody seemed to really understand how most things worked as he found out after a secret visit to the library. Naruto had wondered how that was possible, after all someone had to build those things. The answer to that question had been simple. There was no actual manufacturing base that produced them. They simply appeared in semi-regular intervals at fixed locations. Depending on the location different stuff appeared, from canned food to clothing to high technology. Whole trade cities had sprung up around these locations that now had nothing to sell. Luckily the supply had never been large enough to completely satisfy demand, and at least the native food production was slowly picking up the slack. There had been some failed attempts to recreate the artifacts, but mostly they were just used after someone had figured out what they did via trial and error. After a bit of research Naruto had found that the exploitation of these resources had really started before the Second Shinobi War, or more accurately the economic imbalances created by that had started the war. Now the balance was tipping back in the other direction. Seal-based things like Konoha's water supply were still working fine, but the other technological stuff was breaking down rapidly. There was probably not a single working radio or camera left in Konoha. Last week the electric grid had failed and would stay down indefinitely. Non-perishable goods like clothing remained, and there existed huge stockpiles, meaning the transition wasn't as catastrophic as it could have been. In spite of it all there still was nobody who produced sensible footwear. Oh well, looks like I have to learn leatherworking myself. No matter, I know the basics already from my wilderness survival training, and mom and dad can help me with that. The night before the academy started Naruto was so excited that he could hardly sleep. The academy was a place where he could finally make some friends. He had attempted it several times before, but each time some adult would interfere and prevent him from interacting with the children if they didn't already keep their distance from him. His parents had warned him not to expect too much, but he still was euphoric. Soon he would learn all sort of new tricks. It would cut into his free time drastically, but it should be manageable. 2 classes started each year, one in summer and one in winter. During the 5-year education, the prospective shinobi learned all the basics they needed for their future career. At the end of the 5 years, the graduates of the elite class had the chance to be selected for a genin team under the tutelage of a jonin sensei. The rest would be sent back for an additional 1 or 2 years of education before they were allowed to work as shinobi. Most of what he knew he had discovered during his exploration of an old tunnel. A crack in the wall had allowed him to listen to a conversation between a senior academy instructor and some man who wanted to give his daughter a little money-fueled boost. Listening to the conversation had been enlightening and disillusioning at the same time. The old man surely didn't tell him about the elite part. He made it sound like every graduate got a sensei. Sleep was still eluding him, but he needed to be fresh tomorrow. With a sigh, he began to meditate. That usually helped him if he couldn't sleep. Tonight he decided on a different combination of meditation techniques than usual. He was experimenting a bit which were more efficient. Suddenly he stood in ankle-deep water in an empty corridor instead of lying in his bed. Pipes ran across the ceiling and branched at intersections. Interestingly, he could see despite the lack of any light sources. What the hell did I do now? Well, standing around wouldn't solve his problems, so he examined the surroundings a bit more closely. The water was almost imperceptibly moving. Naruto decided to follow the flow to its source. It wasn't as if he had any preferred direction. After quite some time he entered an immensely large room. It was neatly bisected by gigantic bars that formed an immense door. A large scrap of paper with the kanji for seal clung to the point where the halves of the cage met. Behind the bars he could see a large reddish-orange creature that vaguely resembled a fox with 9 tails curled up and sleeping. He knew only one creature of that general appearance, but why would he meet Yuko now and in that fashion? The next cycle would only begin in 5 days. Apart from that, his mother had outright refused to take the form of the Kyuubi. Apparently she didn't like her previous appearance anymore and preferred a shape more true to a real-life fox than the only vaguely fox-like demon that now slept before him. "Mom?" he asked. Naruto had recently decided to call his parents mom and dad. His previous mode of address sounded too childish for an academy student in his opinion. The fox didn't react in any way. "Mom, wake up," he shouted at the top of his lungs. "Naruto, what are you doing here?" It wasn't the voice of his mother but his father that caused him to turn around. On a wall to the side a rectangle of stone had turned into an opening. His father stood on the other side, looking at him in astonishment. Behind him some very familiar woods could be seen. "Dad!" Naruto ran to his father at full speed while ignoring the shouts to stop, only to crash into an unyielding invisible wall. "Ouch! When I tell you to stop I mean it, son." Naruto rubbed his head where it had hit the wall. "Sorry Dad, I just didn't expect to see you so soon." Daiki chuckled. "Neither did I. How did you come here?" "Well, I couldn't sleep and meditated. I tried a different variant from usual, and suddenly I stood in this sewer. After that I simply followed the flow." "What is this place, and why does it look like a sewer?" "This is the mental interface between the seal and your consciousness. I think the sewer appearance is coded into the seal. Anyway, this is what it would have looked like if I hadn't interfered. Currently it's only an illusion I have layered above the true appearance to deceive anyone who might come to visit. It really looks like this." When his father waved his hand, the hall changed. The gray concrete walls were replaced by artfully carved white stone. The bars of the prison were encased in a thick layer of crystal and overgrown by green vines with multicolored blossoms. Instead of the rusty pipes, ducts made of glass snaked along the ceiling. However, the biggest change took place behind the bars. Instead of the Kyuubi, a yellowish-red amorphous mass could be seen that was connected to an opening like the one his father was standing behind, only this one was opaque and much bigger. Naruto spied 4 concentrations of an angry deep red color and 4 white golden ones inside the mass. Daiki noticed his interest and offered some explanations. "That is where your mother was originally imprisoned. Even now she must keep 9 tails of her chakra inside it lest the seal collapses, which would kill you." The rest of her and especially her consciousness is safely inside our realm, for which you can see 2 of the entrance points. 4 tails of demonic chakra and 4 tails of divine, kept stable by a single tail of neutral chakra. In a few years you should be able to consciously draw upon it. For now you only get an automatic trickle of demonic chakra that increases whenever you are hurt to boost your healing. Yeah, I can feel the influx of mom's chakra. Does the seal do anything else? The containment of the Kyuubi and allowing you to draw its chakra are the primary functions of the seal, but that's not all. There was an entire host of secondary functions, but I disabled them. What secondary functions? The seal had a lot of connections into your mind, many more than are necessary for the primary functions. I can see the effects it has on the false mind I created to trick the seal, but I don't understand exactly how it does it. Like I said before, neither Yuko nor I are really knowledgeable in the ninja arts. Me because I'm not from this world, Yuko because she simply didn't believe that she needed to know. After all, when you're a mountain-sized immortal demon you become quite arrogant over time. Daiki explained. In the last 3 years I was able to figure out quite a lot. The seal acts as a mind-altering device. Negative emotions would be suppressed and discarded to a large degree. Basically, no matter what abuse you suffered, it would actually be impossible for you to truly hate or keep a grudge. You would trust easily, and be incapable of giving up on people. A person you considered a friend would be able to shove a lethal technique into your chest, and you would still not give up on them. Naruto looked skeptical. Wouldn't I notice that other humans act differently from me and adjust my behavior? Acting like that seems suicidal to me. The Yondaime thought of that. Your abilities of critical thinking and logical reasoning would have been completely obliterated. As a side effect, your general intelligence would have suffered, making it extremely hard for you to learn things in a normal fashion. Practical learning would still have been possible, though, even occasional bouts of brilliance. But in general I would have turned out a moron who believed in the good of the people despite all the crap they did to me. Seeing his father's nod, Naruto shuddered. That's monstrous. Yes, this seal is an abomination. It would have taken the power of choice completely away from you, turning you into some sort of savior or saint. I would call that an emotional cripple, but I have no doubt that you could have had a great deal of influence on people. After all, you would have endured quite a lot of hardship and still been convinced of the ideals the Yondaime set for you. No one would ever have known that it wasn't your free will and resolve but the long-term exposure to a mind-altering seal. Additionally, there are quite a lot of fail-safes. Naruto felt sick upon hearing what the heroic Yondaime had done to him, but his father wasn't finished. The first time you would have drawn on 8 tails of the Kyuubi's chakra, a clone of the Yondaime would have appeared. Depending on the situation, he would have quite a lot of options, from strengthening the seal up to brainwashing or killing you. A second clone of the previous Jinchuriki would appear if you tried to subdue the Kyuubi, but we aren't entirely clear on how that was supposed to happen. Then there is a whole host of measures that become active if your mind develops into an undesirable direction. How did the Yondaime put all that into the seal? The attack didn't last that long and was a surprise. Everyone only talks about how he sacrificed his life to seal the Kyuubi, but that can't be right if the seal is that elaborate. Naruto wondered. Precisely. Even a seal master like the Yondaime doesn't develop such a complicated seal on the spot. He must have planned using it for years to create a savior, but I believe it was some time earlier than he intended. Why do you think that? Because some areas of the seal look unrefined and raw, and some of the mind-altering effects make no sense. For instance, I can't imagine that the man intended to give you an obsessive love of the color orange. Additionally, I definitely know from Yuko's memories that the release of the Kyuubi wasn't the Yondaime's doing, but that of a hostile third party who had his own designs on the Kyuubi. Namely using it to attack Konoha. Still, the Yondaime didn't have to use that seal, and he didn't have to die. The previous container was dying but still alive and could have sealed the Kyuubi back into herself. With her death the Kyuubi would have been dispersed for a few years, thereby ending the immediate threat to Konoha. Instead, the Yondaime first used an invocation of the Shinigami to seal the yin part of the Kyuubi's chakra in exchange for his life and then proceeded to use his own seal to imprison the Kyuubi inside of you. If he wanted to keep the Kyuubi in possession of Konoha, he could have used the same seal as the 2 previous containers, which leaves the one doing the sealing perfectly healthy. But what of the true attacker? No one knows of him. The Yondaime didn't tell anyone before his death, making his claim that he sacrificed his own life to protect Konoha highly dubious. After all, if he was still alive he could make preparations, not let the enemy plot for years while Konoha wallows in ignorance. No, I think the Yondaime wanted to create a savior for a long time and saw the opportunity slip through his fingers. Does anybody else know of his plans for me? No idea. We don't know if the Sandaime is aware of the Yondaime's plan. His actions towards you certainly serve to further that goal, but we are operating under a critical lack of information. Your mother thinks the Toad summons gave the Yondaime the idea, which makes the Sannin Jiraiya highly suspect, especially as the man is a seal master as well. A toad with detailed information on the seal and a key to lock and unlock it was certainly present at the time immediately before the sealing. In Naruto's mind several things had come together. So that is the reason besides hiding your existence and contact with me why you want me to play slightly dumb and happy. You don't know if the old man is part of the Yondaime's plan or if he has his own designs. Because it's the first time this sealing method is used he can't be completely sure of the precise effects it should have on me. As long as my behavior in public still resembles the Yondaime's plan I should be reasonably safe from additional influence. That's the idea. There is more, but we should talk about it another time when your mother is present. Tomorrow is a great day for you, and you should be rested. You can come here if you have urgent business to discuss, but our talking strains your mind and shortens the time span we can actually be together. Okay, Dad, he said, slightly saddened that he couldn't use this for more frequent contact with his parents. How do I get out of here? Just meditate and concentrate on leaving. Good night, son. Good night, Dad. Morning had finally come, and Naruto took great care to be on time even if his head was still swimming from last night's revelations. The whispers and stares he encountered on his way hardly fazed him anymore, by now he was used to them. Some families were already standing around before the academy entrance, but there were fewer of them than Naruto would have expected. It seemed this term's student population would be mainly made up from orphans. That won't make things easier. The other kids from the orphanage never liked me. Soon the yard was full even if there was an empty circle around Naruto, and the academy director made some speech about the greatness of Konoha and what role the young generation would play. Then the Hokage spoke some words in a similar vein before the students were divided into different classes and led away by their assigned homeroom teachers. His teacher was a grizzled man with several scars and a stern demeanor who eyed him with thinly veiled hatred. The man's leg below his knee was replaced by a wooden prosthetic, giving him a pronounced limp. My name is Kazuhiro Takaki. You will address me as either Kazuhiro Sensei, Sensei or Sir. I will be your main teacher for the next 5 years. When I call your name you will stand up and give a short introduction. Kazuhiro took a sheet of paper in his hand and began reading names. Aoki, I. During the process Naruto began wondering what most of the children even wanted at the academy. None of them seems to have any real idea why they want to become ninja. Most of their dreams don't even make sense from that perspective. It took some time, but finally it was his turn. Considering the role he had to play, he didn't stand up but jumped on the table. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, and my dream is forming my own clan, he shouted. Kazuhiro's face twisted into a sneer. A clan of good-for-nothings, I have no doubt. Sit down, in detention for your unseemly outburst. Congratulations, Uzumaki, for managing to get a detention on your fist day. You seem to be in a hurry to make a name for yourself and your clan. The last word was spoken in obvious disgust. Naruto sat back down while the rest of the class erupted in laughter. Well, my first day could have gone better.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.